So today we're in Arvada, Colorado. We're here with Patrick Flynn, um, and I'm here with Tony Lupo and Cameron Lupo and Tim McAndrew. And today's date is February 26th, 2022. First off, Patrick, do we have your permission to use this interview for the Library of Congress and for the Warrior Next Door podcast?
Yes, you do.
That's fantastic. And I think we'll start off this interview, this conversation with, could you just tell us a little bit about, where you grew up, what your upbringing was like, and basically your path into military service?
Yeah, so I was actually born and raised in Colorado, and I lived in Arvada, just down the street, about 4 miles from where I live now. So longtime resident of Arvada. I was homeschooled growing up. Otherwise, I would have actually been at Pomona High School. So I grew up, born and raised here. Other than the time that obviously I spent in the military and a little bit for school. Let's see. I was homeschooled ever since second grade. This school wasn't the greatest thing. I felt like maybe it wasn't super efficient. I was running into some problems, and my parents were kind of seeing that I was struggling with, like, I wanted to kind of go beyond what I was normally used to. I was the kid trying to do homework while like during breaks or whatever, and they're like, no, you can't do that, you have to go here. And I didn't understand that, and I was like, why would you hold me back? Anyways, so needless to say, ever since second grade, my parents and especially my mom, they brought me this opportunity to be homeschooled. And so she homeschooled me and my brother as well, who later went to public school. But so I was homeschooled ever since. I started going to Red Rocks Community College when I was 15. I took their active placement, and 15, yeah. Wow. So I was able to get my diploma. We were under a I think it's called like an umbrella school, sort of, when I was homeschooled, so I could still get like an actual diploma and everything. And they kind of tracked the credits and everything like that. So I was able to graduate. From there, I went into Red Rocks, and I started slow because that was kind of my transition period into school. So I did that. I started with like one class, and then the second semester I did 2 classes. Then after that, I just went, all out and started going to school full time, and I really enjoyed it. At the same time, I was working with Colorado Technical University to make sure credits were transferred and everything else, because my desire was to pursue a degree in computer science. Fast forward a couple years later, I was 17. I decided that I'd like to join the military. More not to like make a career out of it, but I wanted to really just feel that sense of accomplishment as far as like doing my civic duty or like being like patriotic. Father was a Green Beret, and so I really always looked up to that. I thought that was really cool, and although I don't think I could necessarily follow in those exact footsteps, it was something where I'm like, okay, I could really do this for a time, do some service, and then get back to life after that. So I joined. They were very supportive of it. So at 17, I guess I was 17 and a half, but so they signed, and they were supportive enough to sign, and they did that, and went to Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, where I enlisted. Well, I enlisted first, obviously. I was a 12 Bravo combat engineer. Oddly enough, at the time when I enlisted, it was 21 Bravo, the MOS. And
so what does the Bravo mean? What's
so Bravo, so an MOS, I'm not entirely sure what it stands for, but it's basically your military occupation. And so at the time, and it's basically, the military loves their acronyms, everything, right? There's so many of them that I don't know if anybody could ever memorize them, but that's one of many, the classifier for what is officially titled a combat engineer. Anyways, so back when like my father had enlisted, he was a 12 Bravo, and then he noticed, he's like, oh, they're calling it a 21 Bravo is a combat engineer now. And then fast forward a couple years into my service, they changed it back to being 12 Bravo as a combat engineer. Anyways, so that's what I enlisted as, which took me to Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, to participate in what they call OSUT training. That's one station unit training. So a lot of times the military, or the Army at least, will separate your basic training in one location and potentially your AIT or advanced individual training in another location. This was all just one one station unit training. You weren't going to move. You were with the same cadre that were running your drills and things like that. So that's where I spent, I think it was 16 or 17 weeks plus maybe a 0 week in there or something for reception. So spent time in there. After that, I graduated. I came back here to continue doing my thing. I was enlisted as a reservist. And so, I came back here. I didn't have to report to a duty station until I came back here and reported to my reserve unit, which was actually the 244th Engineer Battalion in Denver, off of like Peoria, in I-70 area down there. So nearby, and that's where I drilled for a couple of years and enjoyed it. It was kind of odd. There was a lot of combat engineers being assigned to that unit, and they had no idea why, actually, because it was a vertical and horizontal construction company, and we were combat arms, and they were like, we have no idea why they are sending you. We have nothing to do with what you're trained for and everything. So it was kind of a weird fit. But shortly after, so let's see, that was in 2018 is when I would have graduated basic and AIT. I did that for like a year or so. In 2009, towards the end. So it would have been 2008 then? Yeah, it's when I graduated. Yep. Yeah. And then I was starting to drill through 2008, through 2009. And in 2009, the latter year, end of the year, I remember because my son was born. He was a 2-pound preemie baby. He was 11 weeks early. Anyway, so our son Riley was born, and we were in the hospital. We never left his side for the 52 days that he was in the NICU. And, several weeks into that, we were sitting there, and I got a call from the first sergeant, and he said, we actually, this was the time where they were getting ready to do the second surge into the Kandahar, take over Kandahar and like in the Helmand provinces, and IED threats were just taking, like a significant number of the casualties were the result of improvised explosive device. So they were really desperate for combat engineers to go out there. They kind of had a new, they want all routes to be cleared before anybody traveled on them. And so that was basically our mission. They needed more combat engineers that could go do the mission of what's referred to as route clearance. And we basically go ahead of time and we clear the routes for these improvised explosive devices, and also maybe react to any sort of conflict that we get along the way. In theory, giving a clear path for whoever follows behind us, which does or doesn't always work out so great. Anyways, sitting there in the NICU with our newborn son, got a call from First Sergeant. He said, hey, there's a unit out of Conway, Arkansas. It's the 806th Engineer Company, and they are deploying to Kandahar to assist. And they were in such desperate need that they were actually cross-leveling comm engineers from, I don't remember the exact number, but it was something ridiculous, like upper 20s, I think, like number of different states, like 28, 29, I don't know, something ridiculous number of states that they were pulling common engineers from as they could find them to kind of like make this unit. And I think in the end, about 40-ish% of the 806, the unit out of Conway, was organic to the 806, and the rest of us were cross-leveled. So it was cross-leveled? Cross-leveled, yeah, basically. Like for me, for example, they're like, hey, look, we got common engineers out at the 244th here in Denver. We need them to come over here, and they're gonna anyway. So that's basically what cross-leveled is, to help comprise like a unit that's maybe not at like full combat capacity, so to speak.
And a few other questions before we proceed. Could you explain more fully what the role of the combat engineer is? What were you trained to do?
So originally, combat engineer, it's you're focused on like booby traps, things like that. How can you identify explosive devices? How can you build and destroy things? Essentially, like, we learned how to build a Bailey Bridge, for example, but then we learned how to blow up the Bailey Bridge, and things like that. A lot of explosives, so like breaching with explosives, cratering and shape charges, things like that. And then which is weird. I kind of have to think about it because the official like MOS description is relatively or significantly different from what the actual mission was over here. So then, come to find out, we join and become and so what I know a comm engineer to be is we get there and it's hey, pretty much your primary role now, especially given 2 theaters of operation between Iraq and Afghanistan, is what's called route clearance. I'm like, I never saw route clearance in that. Like, let's talk about that. What is that? And that's when we come to find out that we basically have these patrols with special vehicles or, types of vehicles that we favor, that our mission then became to find or become experts at finding unexploded ordnance or any other IED threat that was out on these roadsides that were causing so much damage to other patrols or convoys or anything else, proceeding forward. And so we thought, okay, well, to minimize or to mitigate that, we're going to have us go out. We're trained to deal with and to identify those. And so, what to look out for with the roadside bomb, how to combat, like the radio frequency, remote controlled IEDs versus pressure plate IEDs, command wire IEDs, things like that. And how can we find them? And then how can we take care of them ourselves, whether, we blow those things in place or we call EOD technicians who, some things were just so significant that we couldn't take care of them ourselves when we found them. So we'd, call EOD and they would come and take care of the situation with us. So that's essentially what route clearance came to be. And that's basically, as a comm engineer, what my experience is performing route clearance operations.
And again, before we proceed, so when you joined the reserve, did you sign up for this or did they put you there? Because it doesn't sound like something a lot of people want to sign up for.
No, I mean, I'm sure if I would have done some research, the reason I wanted to be at 12 Bravo was because that's what my dad did. At the time, I think now Special Forces have their own series, their own MOS series, which is the 18 series, but at the time, my understanding is you would sign up for the MOS and you'd get like an X qualifier or something similar to that, which basically said, okay, like this was your job. And now that's one of the ones that we have in group or in Special Forces as well. And so you get like a qualifier, so to speak. Anyways, I think that's pretty much how it works. But anyway, so that's kind of what made me want to go towards that MOS in particular. I'm sure there's plenty of information out there explaining what it was. I wasn't too concerned about it. When I came back, I thought that was, that sounded pretty cool. It seems completely different than what I'll do the rest of my life as a computer scientist.
Let's hope, right?
Or something else, right? Yeah. So I wasn't too concerned, but I was, when I did learn about it, it was exciting. It was definitely, just even the thought of it prior to even being in combat, it was very, very exciting to kind of think about that. You could almost get a rush, be like, wow, this is like really cool stuff. I really want to engage and listen and carefully pay attention, like what I'm being taught here, because this is literally going to save my life, which is kind of cool because in society, I feel there's not too much other than maybe driving, in like a car accident. There's not much that will kill you. At the end of the day, you're probably going to be alive. And so this was cool to actually know, like, oh, I might not be over there, so really, really pay attention here. And I don't know, it was a cool experience for me.
When you were going through training for this, we had been had an occupation and resurgence, not surge, but resurgence. Basically, we had an Occupy, ran Iraq, and were constantly grappling and wrestling with various insurgents that were causing issues, and IEDs were prevalent. Were there people that worked out in that space that were coming in to train you to give you an idea about how they were developing these IEDs, or was the manual pretty standard and you learned what they were doing more specifically once you got out in the field?
It was a little bit of both. So when we finally did cross level and I went over to the 806 and we started, being part of their unit and we started training, we go what's called a pre-mobilization. And I don't remember, I think it was a couple months maybe. That's where basically you start learning everything you need to do to make sure you are completely combat ready, which is a little bit different. Active duty, they're doing it day in, day out. Reservists, especially given like the nature of route clearance, it's very important that you come up to speed in like a more full-time capacity. And so that's where like our reserve unit would there go to a pre-mobilization process. That's where they teach us all the specific things. And it was kind of a bit of both. We obviously had, the field training manuals for the basic like procedures and some of like the more conceptual things, how to identify UXOs.
What's UXO?
Like unexploded ordnance, maybe like components of like a rocket propelled grenade or things like that. Landmines, things of that nature. And then also kind of like, well, here's some different types of IEDs. There's different forms of IEDs. There's, pressure plate IEDs. There's remote control IEDs, like through cell frequencies, and just kind of giving you the breadth you need to understand and be aware of like the landscape of what's out there. Then we also had the people who had deployed and recently come back to the area. They were like, hey, look, we were just in Kandahar last year. Here's the things we were seeing. They were the ones training us. We also had civilian contractors that were teaching us a lot of those things. They were also the ones who were developing a lot of the technologies that we were using out there to combat some of those things. And then also some of the like weapon systems, things of that nature. And then we also had some training specific to, well, and at most of that's pretty much like it was their experience of, this is what we've been seeing kind of lately. Here's what of our intel has been, and here's kind of things we want to train you on, because this is what we saw and what we think you will see based on kind of where you're headed. We get over there and
real quick, let's go back to your son being born, right?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Tell us a little bit more about the journey from, oh my gosh, I'm a dad now, to you being deployed. What did that look like?
Yeah, no, that's I totally forgot about that. So we went from, I got the call from First Sergeant Gustafson, and he was by far one of my favorite first sergeants ever. He was just great. He was very, like, he gave a personal phone call, and he told me, hey, like, here's what's going on. You guys have been cross-leveled. And me and one of my other battle buddies, we actually had deferments for school. So when we enlisted, there's a lot of different incentives. Sometimes you could get bonuses. Sometimes you could get a deferment to not be deployed or activated under current conflicts to, finish school up or whatever you need to do. And part of that I got in my contract was a 2-year deferment to as long as I was in school. And which I was like, okay, that'll be good, because now I can finish. And I had a little bit of time remaining on that. So we actually signed those away because we thought it was important to still go, because the nature of route clearance is obviously one that is very important. It's very dangerous, and we thought it would be good to go as a team. We're used to each other. We know that we have each other's backs, and we knew that it'd be good to be with each other rather than hopefully build good relationships once we got there, which obviously we had to do as well. There was only a small number of us, and we were being cross-leveled, but so we accepted the deployment essentially, and along with our other friends who were involuntarily going. So anyways, we went. Riley came home from the hospital. I don't even remember when. It was like sometime early January, and I left 8 days later for our first Yellow Ribbon event to go out and deploy and start the pre-mobilization process and stuff. So that's kind of how that took place. It was definitely stressful, but I think it also served great purpose, because I was able to meet him and spend that time with him, albeit very stressful time in the hospital, but I was able to meet him and gained such an appreciation for him, and also know that my wife Leo had someone to bond with while I was away, which was going to be very important as well, because we were very young. I guess I was 19 then.
Jeez. Yeah,
so I was young. I was over there 19 and 20. Celebrated Father's Day and my birthday, landed on the same day, and it was my first one, and it was over there. I remember June 20th, whatever it was. But anyway, so yeah, it was a very challenging transition. It was a challenging time, but it was something that really strengthened us, and it was something that we knew needed to be done. It felt like the best path forward, something we prayed about, and we just knew that it would turn out to be the way it needed to.
So apparently you had the full support of your wife and family.
Absolutely.
And that's a powerful statement right there, to have someone in your life that is strong like that.
Oh yeah, completely. And we still, both my in-laws and my parents are still in Colorado. They live nearby, and actually then when it was time for me to move, we were in Denver during that time. That's the only time I actually lived outside of Arvada, was in Denver there for a little while for school. And she and Riley, my wife Leah and Riley, they moved back in with my parents, so we could really save and capitalize on the opportunity to not have any expenses, and my parents were very supportive of that, and they want nothing more than and for them to be here. It was nice because she's just super close by to where she was working at the time and things like that. So, and she could have support as she needed it. And it was really kind of funny because they moved back into like my old bedroom, where I grew up, and now my son like got to grow up for his first 18 months of life in my bedroom, which was pretty cool.
That's amazing.
So,
Probably never thought that when you were a teenager.
Never thought of it. And I know it was definitely pretty, it was pretty cramped in there, between the two. And, but it was a great experience for them, and to have that support, which I know not everyone has.
So that probably gave you a degree of comfort when you were being deployed. Can you comment a little bit, or do you remember what was going on in Afghanistan when they were asking you to become active and go over there and join the war effort?
So I know that they were, my recollection is at the time I knew it was very clear that they were kind of making a second surge into that Kandahar, like the southern area of Afghanistan, which I guess was under just a pretty big stronghold, and they were like, hey, we're going to do something about this. They really ramped up the number of troops that were in the area, and we went over there. It wasn't really until, and I actually do vividly remember this, I didn't realize, obviously I knew it was going to come with like they had a problem, things must have been bad, why would we be coming over there? So I wasn't like ignorant to like what was going on, but it wasn't until I actually got there and they started showing us some of the things, which actually goes back to what we were talking about. It's like, what was that training like? Well, once we get there, now we know exactly where we're going. We're at Kandahar Airfield. We're learning like literally hands-on training specifically for where we are going. What has happened even as of the past couple weeks? What are we seeing? And that's where the training was like exactly what we were going to be experiencing, albeit it changes every day because it's constant cat and mouse. But I do remember vividly when they showed us a map of the country, and they had little red dots or something like marking where all of the I think it was IED encounters that they had, and I don't know if those were like finds or if they were casualties had occurred. I don't remember what it was. I just remember a map, and it's like that was where something bad happened, and it was dots everywhere, but then down where we were going was just covered in red, like covered red. Helmand, Kandahar, the neighboring provinces. And I was like, oh my goodness, this is nerve-wracking. I was young, and I'd never fought in a real conflict. And I had some basic reserve experience, but I had no experience, basically, is what it boils down to. And so I do remember that. That is the one thing I vividly remember. And I'm like, wow, this is actually was a great job at first, but now with the wife and kid back home, it's like, this is going to be interesting, so.
Yeah. And so what were the living conditions like on the base?
Kandahar was huge. It was like a small city, the Kandahar airfield. And we didn't love it. It was very, still running around in PT belts for safety. There's a lot of brass. There's a lot of like rules and regulations. It was cool in the sense that it was NATO. So everybody was on there. We had, like the Canadians, we had Germany, we had so you'd interact with a bunch of different NATO forces, which was really cool. Get to see their different DFACs, like the eating chow facilities. You could go to some of theirs as well and try like different foods, and like the Brits, so like always having the curry and things like that. So, and then the American chow halls anyway. So it was cool in that regard to kind of see all the different cultures and like, wow, like everybody is here helping out. And it was really cool. But it was just not what we were doing. It was a holding location for us to finally get a few birds that could take us to where we would ultimately stay for the majority of our time, which was Fob Ramrod. Anyways, so we were probably there for a couple weeks doing that training and heat training, things like that. So I remember during that time they were showing us things, actual like pressure plates that have been recovered, actual footage of how they've been combating. There's a specific word for it, just doesn't come to right now, but like electronic warfare, essentially. How they've been using like phones and devices to control and initiate IEDs, things of that nature. So another thing I remember was they were showing us how clever the fighters are, and how it's like, look, you are against, you know, a real adversary here. They know what they're doing. They're very good at what they're doing. And they showed us, for example, they had Kandahar Airfield. They have it's huge. They have constant monitoring. They have like technology and systems in place to monitor for rockets that are coming in, and they can like warn, they know when one's in the air because they can just monitor all that stuff. That's where the birds are taking in and out of. And so they would find out, like, you know, insurgents would shoot rockets or something, and it was quick to find out that they knew exactly where it came from, and, you know, birds would go over and wipe them out. And so they found out right away, okay, don't mess with them, like they will come directly to us. They have equipment, obviously, that knows where we're at. So then they got clever, and that's when they showed us, like, hey, look, they had this very primitive, a watering pot, just a watering pot. And they connected they staged these rockets or mortars or whatever, and they had it exactly where they want it to go. And then they had like the charge, or sorry, not the charge, they had basically developed some sort of like device where when the water was inside of the watering jug, and then they could poke a hole, and like, you know, maybe the top part of the pressure plate and bottom part, it's not really pressure plate, you know, but like the terminals would, like, the water would decrease, and then finally once the water was out, the terminals would, you know, make contact with one another and initiate the sequence, which would fire off the rocket. And then by the time we like go over to them, well, they were long gone, you know, and like the size of the holes, like they had pre-calculated, like, well, this much water, this size hole gives us this many minutes. So anyways, it was kind of just really cool to see some of those actual things that they had recovered, the evidence, that everything else, and show what we were up against and how things just changed.
I'd never heard of that. That is
incredible. It was wild. I wish I could almost like show a picture, and I know I've probably got a picture of it somewhere. You could find it. I'll have to try to find one for you, because it is the most ingenious thing ever. But it was so primitive, and I think it's hard to kind of explain what it was exactly. Once you see it, you'll be like, wow, that's clever. It's so simple, it's clever, and it was effective to some degree, I imagine. And so it was cool to see. That's when we had the actual hands-on training of what specifically we were doing in our area. And then of course things change very, very frequently as we're there and as we're doing our mission.
So talk a little bit about the transition away from, the transition to your forward operating base, your FOB. What was FOB Ramrod like? What was it like when you first landed, or what was going through your mind as you were being forward deployed?
Yeah, so we finally got on Chinooks, and they took us to FOB Ramrod. I think we came in like maybe by platoons or something. I don't know that we necessarily like all showed up at once. I'm pretty sure the company 806th was sent there on like over the course of a couple days, but I don't remember entirely. But I remember getting on there. We were in the back of Chinooks, and they flew us to FOB Ramrod. And when we landed there, it was just significantly different. There was not a lot of people on it. It was very, very small FOB, and didn't have the amenities that we once had. Originally, we were in tents, or like not tents, but like big bays with like bunks that just filled everywhere. They were very transitional type facilities, but a lot of people there also had what are CHU's container housing units, which are like basically storage containers or shipping containers that are split, and they have like AC unit, and they're, I mean, luxurious living in for that. That's like kind of what you want to be. And we saw those everywhere. We're like, oh, this is cool. Like, this is going to be great. And FOB Ramrod, we were still in tents, eight person tents. And we crammed about 16 of us in there into each one. It was pretty bad. We did have AC and heat and everything, but it just was very much more primitive. No, there was a chow hall. It was fairly small, and it was a lot closer to get to now because everything was like right there. It was completely blacked out. There was no light. It was just completely dark. You know, you couldn't hardly see anything when you're walking around if there weren't stars, just because there was no real ambient light or anything. They just wanted to keep it completely dark and off the grid. And so it was completely different, you know. And I was like, well, you know, hopefully they have something. We were excited when they told us like, oh, they do have a not a PX, but like a little defect, or what's the word for it? A little shop at, basically, you could buy some stuff. I'm like, oh, hopefully they have something good. And, you know, I mean, they had a couple magazines and maybe some just basic chips and, you know, no chocolate, obviously. But, yeah, so.
Say obviously, what was
just so hot.
Exactly.
It just melts, you know. It was super hot. We showed up in, I don't know, maybe it was like May or something. I think, yeah, it was really hot at that point. I don't know what the temp was, maybe, you know, probably into the 110s or something at that point. So it was just really, really hot, super dry, which was great, but it was just hot. And with all the gear, it's just really, really hot. The things don't breathe well. We had what are called IOTVs, which are, I kind of always, it's kind of like just real thick material, and then you've just got big sappy plates, you know, bulletproof level plates, and I had them in the sides and the fronts, and so it was heavy and hot, and just kind of always miserable. After 100 degrees, you kind of don't really know the difference. At least I didn't. It just sucked. You know, you'd drink 5 bottles of water an hour, and you'd never go to the bathroom. And you're like, how is this possible? You know, it's just sweating all out of you. And so it was just, yeah, it was just hot. And I do remember that. So, but that first night we were there, we were in the tents, and I remember I was with a couple seasoned guys that had previously been to Iraq, and which was nice. We always looked up to them because they kind of been shell shocked already. You know, they've kind of been through it. They knew what's going on, and I remember we didn't know it at the time. This is when we found out. It was, I don't know, it was dark at least at night, so it was sometime at night, and we were walking to the tent, and all of a sudden we hear just the loudest explosion ever, and everybody dropped down, and we were like, what's going on? Like, we just took incoming, you know. Turns out that it wasn't incoming, it was outgoing. We had them, a very small mortar crew that would shoot out loom rounds for operations happening nearby, and we never knew. So then someone from next door ran over the tent next to us, and I don't know, guys, this is, those are outgoing. And so for the next, almost the whole tour, I wanted to know what incoming sounded like, you know, because I'm like, well, what's the difference? I want to make sure I understand the difference. And they're like, well, it's just kind of different. I'm like, I don't know, it sounds pretty bad. And anyways, ours was so small that, like, a lot of other FOBs, and especially the big airfields, they get rocketed and mortared constantly because they're just big targets. It's easy to hit. Ours was just so small and out there that they didn't even hit it, or they couldn't hit it. Like, it would be, you know, they bad aim or whatever. They didn't try. I don't really know. We just never had incoming, really. Fast forward just real quick towards the end of the tour, maybe we've been there like 8 or 9 months. I finally heard the first incoming when we were in a little bit better housing then, but I'm still on FOB Ramrod. And I'll never forget, I was sitting at like our desk with my battle buddy Gilbert, and all of a sudden we heard just boom, and I was like, that's what it is. That's what it sounds like. It was like, and I got out, and because eventually you just heard, a lot of times you'd hear like rocket alarms that would go off and stuff if nearby, but a lot of times those were, so I guess they would try to rocket us, but because the alarms would go off, but they never hit our area. They were just always far away. Anyways, and that was finally the time, like, we'd never get up, we'd never leave for the rocket alarm. You just get seized and you're like, I don't even care, like, it's not gonna hit us, you know. But that one went off, and I'll never forget the sound. It was totally like a movie, you know, where you heard the whistle, and, you know, just because it shot overhead over us, which is why we actually heard it. But I'm like, that's what it is. That's what it sounds like. We got up and ran to the bunker, and that was still the only one. And sure enough, it did. They hit it. They actually hit right where they were staging one of our route clearance patrols, because me and another person weren't going. There was usually a couple of us that would stay back every so often, you know, because they only need like maybe 27 people, and there was like 29 or 30 of us or something, you know, so the rest of us would stick around back home, catch some refit or fix stuff or whatever. So that was my day off, so to speak, and yeah, I'll never forget that. That was pretty cool. But anyway, so yeah, back to when we landed. That is the one thing I remember that very first night on FOB Ramrod was the outgoing, that we had no idea what it was, and my questioning for the next several months what on earth out or incoming sounded like then, you know, and when to be scared. So I'm like, well, when do we take cover and when don't we? And there's like, oh, you'll figure it out.
You're
I'm like,
"Oh,
okay.
I want to make sure I know that. It's really important
Yeah,
information.
whatever. Yeah.
Do I need to learn that on the fly?
Do I need to learn it on the fly? This is one of my super embarrassing moments. This is, but I have to share because it's amazing. So, when we were on FOB Ramrod, or sorry, when we were still in Kandahar, we had one of my good friends, Sergeant Smith, and we were walking back, I think from the gym, and it was dark, and we were walking, and I still to this day don't know what they were, some sort of jet, that was flying overhead, and it sounded just like this whistle that would just like right over you. And I again never heard of like an actual war, just like what you hear in the movies or whatever, it's a whistle and an explosion. He's like, no, I usually don't hear it. It's only when they like overshoot and then you're fine or whatever. And anyways, I heard this one for the first time, and it was like my adrenaline pumped. I was freaking out, and I didn't know, like, okay, do we run like to bunkers? Are we supposed to drop? Like, what do we do? So all I did was I just grabbed his like I think it was like just his shoulder. I just grabbed him, like, what if you run, like I'll know, and like I'll know to run. If you drop, I'll know to drop. And he just looks at me. He's like, "What are you doing?" I was like, "What? Like, what is that?" I was like freaking out. And he's just standing there looking at me, and he's like, "That was." I was like, "Oh man!" But anyways, it was hilarious. But I was like, if you run, like, no matter what, I'm going with you. And now I'll know what to do because I have no idea. So, anyways.
So you lost some cool points to it.
Oh yeah, totally. He was making fun of me forever. He probably still remembers that. But
so where about was Fort Operating Base Ramrod located relative to Kandahar? Like
I think
south
it's
or
like
north?
right. It's very southern, and I want to say it's like right there near the border of Helmand, because a lot of our operations that we'd run, we do patrols into Helmand too, which. Yeah, so I want to say, I need to look up a map again, but I'm pretty sure it was like right there on the border of those two provinces, because it's like if you went, one way or the other, is depending on like how far into Kandahar you're going to go or over into Helmand. So, but yeah, it's definitely southern Afghanistan for sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hey, you talked about when you were at the FOB wearing this kit, it was really hot. Did you have to basically wear that all the time because you could be under attack?
Not on Ramrod. On Ramrod, we were able to change. I believe our weapons were. Yeah, we always are. For most of the time I was there, if not all the time, we were able to. We always had our weapon, obviously. I think we just carried our mag. We at least had one, or I think it was just a single mag that we'd always had to have. So we always had to have our weapon and our magazine with us. We never had to walk around with them like amber, like magazine in the well, or anything, just as long as we had that with us. The second you leave the gate, though, was full kit, full battle rattle, full combat load. So 6 magazines minimum plus 1 in the chamber, stuff like that. So, but on the FOB, even on Ramrod, they relaxed it a bit. I don't know if that was necessarily the case prior to us showing up. And I think when we were there, my understanding, again, it's been so long, but I'm pretty sure that was a relatively new FOB, because my first sergeant had actually told us, who gave me the call when I was in the hospital. He said, actually, we just came from there the year before, and they were building the FOB. So it was relatively new. And he's like, I actually know, that's where I came from. Last year, we were the first ones to build it and stuff. So, but yeah, we were not always in kit, but we were also always on mission. So we were kind of always in kit.
So to kind of have our listeners understand this better, so when you're on the Fort Operating Base, you may have been wearing shorts and a t-shirt and a combat boot, but you always had your carbine slung over you. Like when you ate, when you went to the bathroom.
Yeah. And for the most part, we had our ACUs on almost all. Yeah. Well, we had, we also had like PTs, and because they did have a small gym there, which was nice. Like one of the big units, they had one for like the mechanics and stuff, and I think there's like 4 or 5 of these, and one of them was a gym. So that was really cool amenity that we had. So so we did have PTs and stuff. I think most of the time we're just typically in our ACUs, like our fatigues. So but yeah, anytime, regardless of what your uniform was or what you were in, you had to have your weapon on you. So my weapon never left your side, ever. You were always in it. The only exception to that, I guess, was the showers, when you went to shower, but you had to hand your weapon off to somebody. So battle buddy had to watch it, and then you came back and you had it again.
You mentioned this term battle buddy several times. Could you explain a little more about that?
Yeah, just everybody in your unit, your platoon is essentially your battle buddy, right? But it's specifically somebody that maybe you're with that like particular day, like, hey, me and a battle buddy are going to go to the gym. It's like, me and one of my comrades are going to the gym. So somebody that is kind of one of those slang terms that we refer to as basically one of our comrades that we're going to do. So in the sense, everybody is your battle buddy, but there's in certain contexts, maybe that actually means like, no, that's my partner. This is my battle buddy because we have this one thing we're going to do. Daniel Gilbert, who actually, small world, lives down the street from me now as well.
So in our neighborhood, because you live down the street from me.
Candelas. So he lives really close to me. Yeah. And anyways, and he was again organic to 80 or to Denver when we got cross leveled to 806. He was not organic to it. Anyways, so he was pretty much like always my battle buddy. We've been in together since I think we enlisted maybe 6 months apart. We have been in the whole time together. He's still in, and I'm, since been out. But so he's who I refer to as like more my battle buddy. Is like a permanent battle buddy. He's always been my battle buddy kind of a thing. So I guess that hopefully that answers your question. Sometimes it's basically just based on context,
Well, the reason I asked you is you can read and hear veterans historically talk about how they would fight for their friends, for their buddies, for their comrades, and I just think it's interesting how the Army has formalized that to the point that there's actually nomenclature to reinforce those ideas. I think that's really cool. Yeah,
it is kind of interesting to see like how each generational thing. I've noticed everybody kind of has their thing, and I thought battle buddy was kind of an interesting one when I first heard that in basic training. I'm like, oh, that's kind of cool. That makes sense with battle buddy. Like, that was clever. Yeah. But and now it's like a formally adopted thing like within. So, but
that's cool. So. I have another question about the forward operating base before we start talking about the patrols you went on. So you say it was a small base, but in the military, small isn't necessarily small. About how many people do you think were on this base? You talk about having mechanics there.
It was us and the unit we were replacing, which frankly I don't remember who we were replacing. And then there was I want to say. I'm gonna get it wrong, so I don't even know. But it was another. I think it was an infantry unit. They were rolling around in Strikers, and I'm pretty sure that's what they were doing. And we didn't really work with them. We were but it was us and them, and it was small. I mean, our company I think had 180 people maybe in the beginning. So let's see. Yeah, we had 4 line platoons. I was in 3rd platoon. We had 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th. We had a mechanic, like a platoon, a maintenance platoon, and then we had a headquarters platoon. I think there was 180 or like high 170s. Anyways, so that was to put into perspective our company, and then I think there was like maybe 1 or possibly 2 companies on with us. So it was a really small forward operating base. I'll have to go look up the size of it. I think at the time, maybe like a square mile or something. It was, you could run around it pretty quick. Most of it was a motor pool where we kept all of our vehicles. And after that, towards the end, it started expanding. And I think eventually like ANA, the Afghan National Army ended up taking over towards the end. And I'm pretty sure that had expanded like quite significantly and maybe doubled in size or something. I don't quite remember, but during that time, it was pretty small. There was, I think, 2 companies there, possibly. Yeah.
So, tell us about your first patrol when you finally got to the position. You're in a forward operating base. You've been trained to do this very dangerous but important job. Tell us a little about what your experiences were and what you remember about it.
Yeah. So we did left seat, right seat is the term for it with this other company, and they basically started with, hey, this is the unit we're replacing. We're here now, so let's take some of your people and we'll slowly integrate, maybe it's 10-20% of the people into this patrol. And then, over the next couple of days, maybe 30-40%, then 50-60%. Eventually, that transition is completely handed over to us. I don't know, it might have lasted 2 weeks or something. I frankly I don't remember. I was one of the ones who got to go out, not like the first couple missions out, but it was pretty quick. I was lucked out. Some people were still stuck in Kandahar. That's right, yeah, because some of them, we didn't come all at once because they were still waiting for birds to bring some people over. So, so there was still some time where we were waiting for some people in Kandahar. Some of us were getting to go out on those patrols with the company we were replacing. And I don't know, it was probably a couple weeks in, and maybe I got to do the first patrol. And I remember it got scrubbed because it was so hot and we had so many issues with. So we had a policy that the AC in the units in our vehicles had to be operating, or you couldn't take that vehicle out, just because, 110, 120 degrees at that time, plus all of your kit, and then plus being inside of the vehicle, which is like an oven. It at least bring it down from it made the temp so that you could live in it, just, but it was still very, very hot. So maybe it was 100 or 110 or something, but you're not gonna necessarily just fry to death, and that would be a problem because everybody would become a heat casualty, and you'd have a problem. It'd be pointless. You couldn't actually feasibly go out in it. And I remember we got out, and it just seemed like one problem after the other. I'm sure LT and everybody else was just so irritated because I know for sure I think two of them went out. One either had a mechanical problem, and another one was AC, and then another one, I think the Husky, which is a single person vehicle. And it's basically designed it's a modular design to be blown up, but it essentially houses one person, for obvious reasons. And his AC went out and he became a casualty, a heat casualty. And so the mission, which takes a lot for them to actually abort a mission, basically, they're like, look, we were a few miles out and this is just not working. So we came back, I'm like, well, that was miserable and hot and hours, and because we go really, really slow, and there's a lot that has to happen before they can finally say, yeah, no, there's not enough equipment to make this happen anymore. What's going on? So we had to come back and we're going to try this in a few hours or whatever. I guess the missions, they're not scrubbed for the entire day. It's more of a get back here, fix what we need to be done because we're doing this here. We're going to try again, basically. So that was my first mission, which really wasn't a first mission out, but I remember it was just hot. It was pretty scary. When we first went out and we entered onto Highway 1, it was just kind of eerie. It's now we're in with people, civilians who were driving up and down, and it was just it was cool to see hey, we're here and we're a new culture. Look at how these people are living. this is life for this guy. But then here, we're also scared. I'm well, there could literally be death around the corner anywhere. I need to be doing my job. And so it was just a whole bunch of weird feelings all at once. And it's hey, this is not training anymore. This is the real deal. This is that thing I always thought of back years ago. I'm I wonder if I'll ever get deployed. Oh man, I wonder what that would be like to be deployed. And it's here I am now. It was just all those thoughts and emotions in my head at once. And it was really cool. Yeah. And then, problems started happening with the vehicles and everybody getting very frustrated on the radios and stuff. And it's wow, this is not working out great. What a terrible first mission, but.
How many vehicles in that first mission, roughly?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I think 6, 2 Huskies, and a Buffalo, or maybe there was 4. Sorry, I'm trying to think here. I think there's approximately 6 or 7 vehicles in most of our patrols. Mm-hmm. We had 2 Huskies.
And what are those again?
A Husky is a modular vehicle, it's when I say small, they're all pretty big, they're beefy vehicles. But a Husky is a vehicle that houses one individual, the operator, and it has a V-shaped hull, so it's very claustrophobic. It's about this size, and it's very, very small. The top has 2 flaps so that pressure can open up. They never lock it, just that way if you get hit, the pressure will just blow them open. And then it's about this wide on top, and then the hull underneath is 100% V-shaped, a 30, 35 degree. I don't remember the technical detail, but it is literally this, and it's so that blast underneath you will deflect off of it. It's not flat here, which those strikers were just getting crushed because blast would be right under them. They're flat, it'd breach the hull, and everyone would just, perish in. The Husky though, it was a perfect V, and so it just deflect. I know to date, even between the 2 theaters of operation, there was very few like in comparison to all the other vehicles, even though that was the one actively looking for threats, it had like significantly fewer casualties than anybody else, or maybe not casualties, but like deaths, I guess.
So was that designed to?
It was
be
literally
the-
be designed to be blown up too. So like not just withstand to take a blast, but designed to be blown up. It was 3 parts. It was the main part. It was the front 2 wheels, which were out on one. Yeah, and then the second part was sank. But those pins. So there's basically on the front. There's the the front set of wheels hook on 4 pins. And that's all it is, with like a bolt, and then same with the rear. So it's very, very easy for them to break if you're not super careful. But when the blast goes, it'll just take those wheels right off. And we would have spare parts when we had a flatbed. Actually, maybe we had 8 or 9 vehicles, because we also had a big flatbed that we always took with us, because we anticipated blowing something up along the way.
Right.
And so when that happened, we just take off one of those modules, put it down, and some of our mechanics in 15-20 minutes could have the front ones put back on and practice. Depending on where you got hit, it could be significantly longer too if it was in a bad spot, but you just continue mission, and I always thought for the Haji, the bad guys, I'm like, that's got to be so frustrating seeing that get blown up, just completely destroyed. Like, we hit it, and then it just like puts a new one and keeps going on. Like, it was great. They did, yeah. And those are literally, they're modular, and we just keep a couple extras on hand, and hopefully it didn't destroy like other things. In which case, like maybe it was disabled until the mechanics could get a hold of it. But it was designed to be blown up. Whereas a lot of the other like RG-31s we ran, the gun trucks, those definitely had more of a V shape, but not really V, but not completely flat. So they could definitely withstand more of a blast than, like heaven forbid, a Humvee or something, which they don't even use. By the time I got over there, that was not even an option. They had replaced those with what are bigger version, like much bigger version. They call it an MATV. Strikers were out there and stuff, but again, Strikers are flat underneath, and even with their they'd have. They were upgraded, so to speak, with like plating underneath, an extra steel plate, but still just a lot of those IEDs over there were just so massive that just like pierced right through them. So it was nice to have our vehicles, which were bigger, and again, we were outfitted with those just be given the nature of our job. We expected to be blown up and to find those threats and stuff, and we did. I don't remember what our final ratio is. I'm sure I could reach back to like my Sergeant, Bartlett or Sergeant Turpin. They were kind of our guys who were like in charge of like doing a lot of our demolitions along the way. And I'm sure they have that percentage, but I don't know. It might've been crappy, like a 60-40, like find hit ratio or something. We were just constantly getting hit. It was just so hard to find anything over there, because a lot of things that the previous Iraq crews had experience with did not really apply here, because they're like, oh, you look for asphalt that's like freshly laid, that didn't get approved, like why did no, the government didn't authorize that, or hey, like there's freshly dug up dirt here, or hey, look at this. But very, very visual indicators. Whereas once we got there, we have what's called moon dust. We called it moon dust because it was like such fine sand that you could literally walk in it and you couldn't see footprints. And it's like, well, that's unfortunate. How am I supposed to see if like somebody dug something up? And the answer is you can't, so you end up just getting hit all the time. We had this one culvert that we would constantly get hit at, because it usually, for whatever reason, if you're hit there once, you're almost always going to be hit there again. And that time, we had tons of people in our platoon alone that got hit at that same culvert anyways, but it was just so hard to see stuff, so we got hit a lot. Anyways, that's why they outfitted us with those vehicles.
So you say you get hit a lot. Were these vehicles that you had protected enough that individuals generally didn't get injured, or is there people get injured all the time?
I'd say a little bit of both. It depends. For us, in our experience, we had just what we'd consider like basic casualties, I guess. A lot of maybe TBIs, like traumatic brain injuries, or or like minor concussions. Maybe that's a better word for a lot of them, was like maybe some minor concussions. Some of them were like pretty violently, rattled around, and that could definitely make people, have back issues down the line. I know we've got some of my guys who have like pretty bad back issues now from just some of those blasts. Some of them have had TBIs. So it just kind of depends. Our company was really fortunate in that we never had like significant loss of life or limb. A lot of every single one, I think literally every single one of us was a casualty at one point. But none of like, nobody was getting their limbs necessarily blown off or anything, which was good considering like our other sister company, we turn left and they'd turn right. And they had like several recoilless rifles in the area that were killing people in their patrols. And so
what do you mean by turning left and right?
Oh, so like when we get out onto Highway 1, a lot of times our area of operation, we'd turn left on Highway 1 and we'd go out that way, and that was kind of our AO, and they'd go right. And even though we were all kind of in the same area, that's where that recoilless rifle was sitting out for that summer. And eventually they ended up getting him, but for a while until they got him, he was hitting. I remember when the Buffalo came back. A Buffalo's a really, really massive vehicle, and it's got a big arm on it, like a claw and arm, and it's got a camera on it, and it's what interrogates suspicious. Like if we suspect seeing something, we'll call the Buffalo up. It'll interrogate it. It's got like air compressor on it, so it can like blow air away, and it can kind of dig around, and you can see it the whole time, like see the wires, and that's what we use to interrogate them, right? And then we're in this big, massive vehicle that's really safe. Anyways, I remember when that rolled back through once because like it had rolled over because it got hit once, and I know they had lost somebody on that time. There's another time a recoilless rifle, I guess, had gone through it, and that came back to our fob, and it took out someone. Unfortunately, they didn't survive that. So we were just really fortunate that, that
you were only getting blown up.
We were getting, we didn't have like significant casualties like that, like they were. So, and like many of the other areas, and a lot of the people at the striker units too, or that were with us, I know they had some, some far more significant injuries too. But I think a lot of that too, a lot of it was partially because of what they were driving, and then also some of the things, they were different mission too. A lot of them, if they're on foot patrols, now you're really more susceptible to injury if anything happens versus being mounted. So
are you able to appreciate the fact that the things that you're speaking so casually about sound absolutely horrifying to people who haven't been in that position?
Yeah, it took a while to figure that out too.
I mean, you're talking about, we all got blown up.
Because, yeah, it is weird, and I've had to be careful over the years, and I'm hoping I get a little bit better about it, because I've come to find out where civilians just don't kind of understand. Because a lot of times too, I want to talk about it with your battle buddies and things, because once you get out, you kind of realize, I guess, I don't know, maybe there's some therapy in talking through things, right? And so like it's good to always have those battle buddies that we can kind of exchange. But then when you leave and you're not with them all the time, it's harder. And so I've realized, then you start looking at some of your other friends and explaining things to them, and they're just, it's totally different, or you'd be like, show them a video of one of our platoons getting hit. I'm like, oh man, check out this video of this guy getting hit, and all of a sudden this thing just gets blown up, and it's just like this massive explosion. And I'm like, this is cool. It's cool. Watch this, and he's like, what is wrong with you?
Yeah.
He's like, I'm like, well, no, he died or anything, but like, look at this, and they're just looking at you like, what is wrong with you? And I come to find, I'm like, you're right. I don't think people actually get it, because it is one of those, we call it just that sick, twisted military humor that you just start to acquire. And I think it just gets worse the longer you're in, I imagine, and the more you've been out there, but
I mean, in complete, honesty, full disclosure, I really thought by the time we got to this point in the interview, we would be talking about, how rare it was to see an IED, and then when you had one, it was a fire drill. And instead, what I'm hearing is it was just common. You guys were literally going out patrol, prepared to get blown up.
It was definitely commonplace. That's not to say that we are finding like 5 a day or anything. There was definitely some days where, 3 days, 4 days, even a week, or some at a time, like especially during the winter where you just wouldn't see as much. I had heard that maybe it's harder to create some of the HME, which is homemade explosive, during those times in the winter when it's not as hot. A lot of times the kids or whoever else coming over from Iran to pick fights, or some of the other people, like upset, what is it, Ramadan, or during that month where tensions are really high because they're just really angry already from not eating and everything else, and so there's a lot of firefighting that happens. So I think there's a lot more heat, so to speak, during the summer. And anyway, so there was definitely times where it was boredom, like a lot of things, but I think also in that regard, to kind of in reference to what you were saying, it definitely is like you're constantly kind of on your feet, or at least hopefully you are. You're not getting complacent. I think some people definitely get complacent, other people maybe not necessarily, or you get that one find or something else that kind of rejuvenates you, I guess, to not be complacent for the next few days. And unfortunately that window shortens as the tour goes on, and you kind of almost stop caring. You're just like, at this point I don't care, like let's just go out, like I'm just so tired anyways, so if the rocket's gonna hit, it's gonna hit, but I'm staying in my bunk, kind of, I'm not going to the bunker again, that kind of mentality, right? But I think we all did really good, and that was partially also really, I think, contributed to our success of not having such significant casualties. Could have been that we were blessed and watched over, which I'm sure had a part of it. Could have also been that I like to give credit to think that we just weren't super complacent compared to the stories that we've heard and some of our other companies that we've witnessed in the past. And but at the end of the day, I still feel it was luck of the draw. Are you going to find it or are you not? And go till you find it or it finds you.
Well, tell us more about that. Tell us more about some of the typical patrols you went on and what you encountered.
Yeah, so we had pretty much two types of missions. One were our schedule was 4 days on, 2 days off, 4 days of missions each day, and 2 days to refit, which is all that crap you blew up. Now we got to go fix it. We got to do maintenance on the vehicles. We've got to do everything you need, prepare your gear, clean your gear, do your laundry, whatever you have to do, get it done, because we're going out for another 4 days. Those day missions, I remember it usually took like 12-ish hours, A lot of times, once we finally got the routine down too, we had a mandatory 3-hour mission prep, which always frustrated me at the time because it was mandatory to be out there 3 hours ahead of time. I'm like, what are we going to do for 3 hours? You can only do so many rock drills and stuff. And
what's a rock drill?
Rock drill, basically like how we would approach an ambush, or like how we would approach just different scenarios. Like pick a couple scenarios, like, hey guys, today let's kind of refresh some of our drills. Like if we're going to, and you literally put rocks in the sand and you like draw, and you're like, okay, here's our patrol, here's how we're starting out, and there's an IED right here, Gilbert, come over and show me what we're gonna do. How are we gonna handle that? And he shows, and he's like, well, this one's gonna come up here and secure the east, and this person's gonna come secure the west, and then these two people are gonna kick out and clear a path for the buffalo, and then and just kind of show just our rock drills. And I mean, I guess you could do it for 3 hours. The reality was it kind of infuriated us sometimes to have to like sit out there for 3 hours, but we made good use of the time. And a lot of times we got into such a good routine, we were really efficient. But anyways, we would prepare ourselves for the mission 3 hours ahead of time, and we'd go on the mission. We had to be out there a minimum of 8 hours, so like you couldn't go too fast. We were supposed to go 10 kilometers an hour through known areas of interest, like I think they called them like AIs or something. But basically, when it was an area where we've been hit a lot in the past, where we had intel that there might be something, whatever, we had to do 10 kilometers an hour. It's 5-6 miles an hour. It's crawling. You're literally crawling.
Yeah, wow.
And you're just looking out, you're trying to find anything you can. Other times we were able to jump that up to 20, so about 12 miles an hour, and so you're still crawling, but you're going a little quicker. But anyways, and our routes would typically take at least 8 hours if you're going that speed. A lot of times, though, the problem would be if you did hit something or you found something, you'd stop and it might take an hour to interrogate it. If something broke, you might be there for a couple hours fixing it. There's some things where it could be, you get hit, you load it up, and then we got hit 5 minutes later. And so it's just super frustrating, in which case that, like, I remember once I almost completely just blacked out. I was just so tired. And I remember we had been out for, it had to probably been close to 24 hours at that point, and we were just exhausted. Everything bad had happened up to that point. Things were breaking. We had been getting hit multiple times. And finally we were driving. We were so close. We could see the base like way up ahead, and it was dark, but the reason we could see it was because there's this big, we called it Pegasus, and it's this big giant like white balloon in the sky, and it basically has cameras and stuff on it, and yet it looks everywhere. I'm like, oh man, there's Pegasus. Like, we were so close. And sure enough, we got an all stop, and I was just furious. I'm like, I can't do this, and I finally I don't know what, that day I must have just been on my breaking point, and I was like, I'm done. Like, and I was like, I don't even care. My platoon sergeant next to me, he like totally understood. And I was like, I'm just going to bed. Like, right here, I need to sleep. He's like, it's cool, man. He's like, we've got you, just sleep. I was like, I can't do this. This is ridiculous. Like, why couldn't we just go? We were so close, and in hindsight, it was good that we stopped. And, you have other people with you who maybe got to rest ahead of time or not, or whatever. And, because I think we ended up finding something that day. Oh, it didn't like hit us, but we, it was a confirmed like threat that they found and everything, which we took care of. But
so was your primary mission basically to travel up and down?
It was, yeah, pretty much.
Clear for everyone else.
Pretty much, yeah. That was the idea. There was like the dailies, So it basically depends. Like, the one day it might have been a quick 12-hour mission. The other one, it could have bled into where we got back and we literally had a mission 6 hours later, and so like, hurry, sleep, and go. But in theory it was the 4 days on, 2 days off. And yeah, those were primarily Highway 1. There was another one. Highway 1 was like the only paved road in Afghanistan. And so we do that one a lot. There was also a couple other routes we did. One was like this schoolhouse. We'd go up to this schoolhouse, literally where kids would go to school, and then back. And then there was another one too. I cannot remember the name of it. But anyways, those are like pretty much our primary 2 or 3 routes that we'd clear every day. And then other platoons too were clearing those same routes. I mean, we were constantly patrolling them, because the second you leave, like, somebody would place something, they'd also get really smart and they'd know who we were, and they'd be like, oh, that's route clearance, don't mess with them. They're angry, they're waiting for something to do, versus maybe wait for another patrol who, just like a regular convoy or something, delivering something, and they're kind of complacent, and their gunners are just kind of, nodding off or whatever. And which was also really good. We didn't really have that problem a lot. We had like people who were ready to go, and they can sense that. And so sure enough, you'd pass through a place, and 10 minutes later you'd call like, so-and-so got hit, and we're like, wait, we're just there, and it's like, yeah, well, they weren't going to pick on you. They're going to pick on them. And since we'd have to turn around and go back. And so it's just always a threat. So those were our routes. And the other platoons, I guess what I meant to say is, they were also patrolling them constantly. So those routes were constantly being patrolled, just because that's how many IEDs were constantly being pushed out there. And but yeah, it was ideally like a 4-2 schedule. But a lot of times too, then we'd have special missions we'd go out on. It was really cool. We got to work with Green Berets a few times, the Special Forces, United States Special Forces. We also got to work with Marines, and we got to work with British infantry a lot, because again, it being a NATO conflict, it was really cool being able to work with the Brits. And in that regard, what we would do was, we might be gone for a week or 2 weeks at a time. They're like, hey, look, we have patrol base 3 out here in somewhere in Helmand, and it's like the whole village, like nobody inhabits it anymore because the Taliban have taken over. Like, there's so many IDs, they literally couldn't even live there. And now it's just, we're going to help fight them. We have this route, this 100-meter stretch of route that we're going to clear. There's so many IDs, there's like one every couple feet, kind of a thing. And so that's where we went for the Brits to operate, and we'd also clear those IDs. And so we're out there in 2 weeks at a time, just living out of the trucks, so that's also what it could look like, to where it was just like a big camping trip. We did those pretty frequently.
So tell a little bit more about clearing IEDs. There's multiple different types. Did you ever have to like go out physically on foot and clear one, or is it always using a buffalo or some other type of machine?
We did so we tried to stay mounted whenever possible. Obviously, that's just probably the most safe method of doing it. But yeah, when you did find something, we had individuals who'd specifically been even further trained in like actual dealing with the IEDs, because they, we all had, we were carrying around C4 and charges that they could make to blow them up. So a lot of those charges that we did, or IEDs that we found, we could get what's called a BIP request, a blow in place request, call up to the TOC. Here's kind of the environments. There are certain things that required us, like size and placement of certain IEDs required EOD techs, in which case we'd have to call, and an EOD tech would have to take however many hours it took for them to get there to us. But that was one nice thing with us, is a lot of things we could just blow up ourselves. So we had a couple guys trained. They would have to approach it. Obviously, we'd interrogate them. We would have to approach them, and then they would have to place charges on those and blow them in place. We also did dismounted patrols for some green zones on certain routes. Highway 1 had a couple routes where there was several miles of green zone. And what I mean by that is because a lot of times we're on the road, but kind of going back to how I said it was a cat and mouse, the threat, like we'd be clearing IEDs and they would pack the culverts, a culvert for the water, because it's like a lot of agricultural land. They would pack culverts full of explosive, and it'd be a command wire. They were watching you from mile, 2 miles, whatever away. And when the vehicles or patrol would drive over it, they would initiate it and it'd blow. It just so much explosive, it'd blow through the culvert and kill everyone on top of it, So we decided, okay, we're going to clear the culverts. So we will kick 2 Huskies typically out here, and they'll check in the culverts.
Like go right in them?
No, not necessarily. And then they'd be like 50 to 100 meters off. You'd vary. You'd never make it consistent, but like 50 to 100 meters off, and you'd look in and like visually inspect, like, yeah, it looks clear, or maybe you would be close if you need to be like 5-10 meters away to like get, if there was some weird terrain or whatever, but you distance yourself, but basically you were looking into the culverts and making sure like, yeah, no, it's good to go. And then, Haji decided, like, because again, they're smart, they watch and like, okay, well, we can't get you guys on top, then we're going to get the Huskies or whoever's out there. And so now they have those out there, and then they're getting hit constantly and stuff, but anyways, because that was our effect, that you could really pack explosives under those culverts, and we didn't want that. So we had dismount and some areas where you couldn't get the vehicles out there because it was like farmland or it was too crazy of terrain or whatever. And so that was nerve-wracking, but also kind of cool. You'd actually got to get out and you'd get a like patrol through the areas or through a village. Sometimes in villages we'd dismount as well, so we could kind of interact with the locals, and or because it was just a good spot. Maybe it was kind of tight and we wanted some extra security going through, and so that was fun. So we did a mix of both mounted and dismounted patrols, but primarily we're mounted. So yeah.
So were you ever in Huskies?
No, I was super claustrophobic. I think I did it once. I'm like, man, this is ridiculous. We had some Husky drivers who are incredible. Hollis, Acree, Gilbert, a lot of my battle buddies from here. There was a lot of them. Hannah, they actually were so good at those things that they ended up pretty much staying in them. A lot of roles, like, you could kind of switch around and everything, but they were just really well suited. They knew what they were doing, and a lot of them, they did that. A lot of them got found. Some of them had a knack for not finding them, but being found, and they kept blowing our stuff up, and but they were a good group of guys. Yeah. And the rest of us, some of us in the backs of the RG-31s, we would like dismount through green zones. Others were drivers, and then obviously leadership might be the TCs, so next to the drivers, and kind of the truck commander is what that was. And so it just kind of depends. If we were investigating something, you'd dismount and you'd get a secure perimeter going, or if you're blowing something, or if you're taking contact, maybe it would be different. So just kind of depends. But yeah, it was consistently inconsistent, I guess. It seems like everything was very, very consistent. At the same time, it was always changing. And yeah, back to like my first mission, my first real mission, like day 2, when I went out, the one that actually worked. That was I actually got hit myself that first day, and it was funny because so they're in the Army, they have they've always had like a combat infantry badge, a CIB, and like the infantry guys have it. I'm sure they're bitter that they've kind of have another badge for all the Army, because that was probably their thing, and they still have their thing, and I know it's incredibly rewarding for them to receive. But now the rest of the Army also has what's called a combat action badge, and it's I think it was developed post 9/11 basically, because they're like, well, so many people have engaged in direct combat now that what about them if they're not infantry MOSs? And anyway, so to qualify for that, it's like you have to engage in direct combat, enemy fire or whatever, or be engaged, something like that. Anyways, it was one of those cool things where like combat guys, if you're in a combat arms like infantry or comm engineer or something, you kind of like deep down want that, or some people are very vocal, but I was kind of like, man, it's like that would be cool to actually just know for myself that I had that. And it was I'm like, just to know that like I had actually been in combat, I'm like, man, I wonder if that's going to happen, because a lot of people, a lot of times you don't see combat, which is probably a blessing in and of itself, and which I kind of hoped for. I was like, well, that would be great, but I would also like to know that I had some cool stories, I had some to share with my family, and like deep down I had it. Yeah, like did it actually, how effective was it? Did we make a difference? And I guess we could have made a difference even without being like hit and stuff. But anyways, so it was we had this cab board, and like it was something stressful, and like between ourselves we said, wow, I really hope we can, like, I guess even a reward aside, it was more of I hope we see some combat experience or are able to participate in something like that, and just gain more of an appreciation than anything else of like what other people have been through, And so we I got it the first mission now. So that was like, I was like, well, I don't know why that. And at the same time, like, well, we just made it. I'm like, what is the rest of the year going to look like? Like we've got a year to go. Yeah, like, what are we doing? This is going to suck. But
so what happened on your first mission?
So we went out, it was on Highway 1, and it was that culvert I was referring to earlier. We call it the 3rd Platoon's culvert, and it's because we just always got hit at it. I will send you guys a picture of it too, because you'd think it's pretty cool. But it's this big concrete culvert that we just kept getting hit at. And what happened was that day we had both the Huskies off route. One of them got hit or broke. 2 Huskies. No, one of them got hit. We had 2 Huskies. The one on this side of the road, my right side, ended up getting blown up when he was going over something. But for some reason, I don't know if we didn't have a module or whatever, we had to load him up on the big boy. So we loaded him up, and then because we couldn't have an extra Husky, we only had one. The other one was a gun truck. We had to put, I think, the other Husky on the one that had a little bit rougher terrain, or vice versa, because the gun truck like couldn't do that. So we pushed them off to take his place. I was one of the lead gun trucks, so we had rollers. We were the lead gun truck, so we had what our cards called Sparks mine rollers, and they were on our truck. And so we're like, okay, well, because you guys have rollers on your truck, you guys go off and take the place of the Husky. And so we're like, okay, cool, that's what we'll do. And basically what these mine rollers are, they're intended, they weigh about 10,000 pounds. It depends on the variation, but like 10,000 pounds, and they can give enough pressure. I don't know how long they are, maybe 20-ish feet or something. They go onto the front of your vehicle, and the whole point is if there's pressure plates or anti-tank mines or whatever, it'll hit them and blow the rollers, and you've got some standoff, which helps significantly, and so that's why our vehicle went out. Well, they're, again, really smart, and so when we bounced off, luckily one of the gunners, we had him get down, because a lot of times if the gunners, the blasts will come up there. So regardless of those vehicles, it's really dangerous for gunners. There's so many who don't wear harnesses correctly or whatever, and they get ejected out, and that's actually why they die, or the blast hits them and everybody else is, not as bad off. So we have him come down, and I kind of just went, he had that spot, I kind of went back a little bit further and just kind of sat on some cargo, and because we anticipate, like, we could definitely get hit now, so get down. we kept going, and within 5 minutes, we get to that culvert and we hit a pressure plate, and they had put the pressure plate up here and offset the charge about 20 feet back. So when our pressure plate got hit, it was like right under us, so it shook us up. We were all pretty dazed from that one. And, I ended up having a traumatic brain injury, and actually a spinal cord injury from that. That I found out about later, because and not because the hole was fine. It was a big blast. It was really, really big. But the main thing was when it just rocked that vehicle up in the air, I hit my head, my hyperflexed my spinal cord, and it basically just crunched it. So we all had like TBIs, and we had concussions, and we were off for like 7 days. But we were in the kind of the middle of nowhere, and we had Doc, who was, I don't know, a 19-year-old guy maybe, and so he was really, really good. But like, we didn't have a Role 3 medical facility or anything. We were just, okay, yeah, this looks bad. And we were all just pretty naive. We're like, okay, well, let's all just hang out for 7 days and like light duty or whatever,
So that was,
and it was good. And then we just went doing stuff there. And yeah, for me, the story there was essentially over time, the nerves like started dying off, and so I started having a lot of like loss of functionality in my hands and things like that as the nerves started dying off over the coming months. And that's finally, eventually, I found out, I was like, there's something definitely going on here, and this side was like getting smaller than the other, and it was just really kind of weird. I had like no more strength. And anyways, when we were about to be headed home anyways, I got a head start on it to go figure out, and they're like, okay, let's get you over to like a Role 3 clinic back to Kandahar Airfield with some real doctors. And then that's when the doctor's like, oh man, he's like, when did this happen? I was like, July 5th, and he's like, what do you mean? I'm like, July 5th. He's like, well, I don't know what it was, January, February or something. He's like, what do you mean? He's like, wait, so you never came in? And I was like, no, like we just didn't really know. And we didn't know anything was wrong. And he's like, no, you should have been here like the first day. He's like, we can't do anything for you here. He's like, you got to go to Germany. And, and then from there, went to Germany. And for Germany, I was in there for 2 weeks, and they were doing all sorts of tests. And I'm like, yeah, we can't do anything for, like, you can't go back. I'm like, well, we're almost done anyways, so it doesn't matter. And they're like, okay, good, because you're not going back. And then they sent me to, luckily, Fort Carson. But anyway, so that's kind of how that happened. Yeah, so after that, we just went back and kept doing missions all.
So wait, so I was under the impression that when you got injured, just from knowing a little background, but that's when you went home. This happened on your first mission? First real mission, yeah. So did you think at that point that was the new normal, or did you think you were going to
No, because it wasn't like right away. We were all, like I said, we were all really, really dazed, confused, and like pretty sick to our stomachs kind of a thing. We got knocked around pretty good. And I remember I was with Brawley and Sergeant Randall, Mastriani, Clark, and myself, and we were in there. And I sent him a video to my dad, because one of the guys, Fisher, had it on his, he was in one of the other gun trucks up on the road. He got on film, and I was like, we were so happy because he had a helmet cam on, and he's one of the gunners. And
he got the explosion.
He got the explosion on film. So we're off there, barely in frame, and he's like, we're just kind of putzing around, and all of a sudden just the whole thing goes up, and we have it in slow motion. It's the coolest thing ever. You see the shock wave come all the way up, like we're way out here, and it comes all the way up onto the road, and then it like hits him, and you can see him like fall back. It is the coolest thing. I sent it to Pops right away. I was like, don't show anybody, but like this is I was like, this is really cool, check this out. Yeah, but I was like, hey, you'll appreciate the vehicles we're in too, because it was a testament to like, that was a really big one post EOD analysis. I don't remember what they said it was, but it was significant in size, and so it gave a lot of confidence to him. Like, wow, like that was obviously a livable experience, and it shows that it was real, and it could happen. Literally, it happened the first day for me. So don't mess around, and be careful and respect. Like, you have they know what they're doing. Like, it's not just a movie or something like that. I don't know. I just gained an appreciation for that I was blessed to keep my life, and that we were all okay. And I think it really helped set the path, at least for me personally, of like what's out there for the rest of it. So it actually worked out to be a great experience in that regard. I don't know if I looked at it necessarily that way, but looking back at it, I'm pretty sure that's what I was telling myself. So But
okay, being a relative word.
Relative being to that, yeah, it's like it could have been worse, So but it's it's the one thing I just didn't like about him. I felt like firefights or something with, I don't know, I felt like IEDs were the coward's way to play. Come out and fight, which
Did you
by
ever
all
see
means they did. We ran into a couple times with command wires where, not the ones that actually hit, but we found, for example, one day I was on Highway 1. It wasn't too far away from Frog Ramrod either. We found so there's like little compounds, basically. There's like little, like, these compounds everywhere, and we found one. I don't know who found it. It was our guys, but we found it was a command wire. Yeah, it was a command wire, because I think it was onto Highway 1. But what that means is they're watching, like they have to be watching, because it's at their command. So it's either a command pull, which think of like a safety pin, and they put something in between it, and then when they pull it, bam, it makes the connection. Or it's a command wire, meaning they do something on there and then they send the signal. But regardless, it's a command wire initiated device, and we followed it all the way back to like this compound, and sure enough, there's, I don't know, like 3 or 4 dudes there with like AKs and everything else, and they were just claiming like nothing. I mean, I don't know if it necessarily like terminated right there or if it was nearby, but there was this group of jokers there doing whatever, and we had no proof, and they knew it, and I think ultimately we did. I can't say it was them, so I don't want to give blame to them if it wasn't, but you can kind of, the demeanor and everything, you can just kind of tell, because we ran into that a lot, where it's you can't do anything. They know our rules. They know what our rules of engagement are. So it was frustrating, but you can't do anything. And man, we had to go. We have this thing called the hide. I think it's called a hide system, but basically it takes their fingerprints, takes their retina, all picture of them and stuff, and we log them as like known people. You don't want to get into that too, because you'll run into like problems when you get to like DIA or something, because it's a worldwide thing. But we take pictures of them and stuff, so that next time if somebody else, another sister company or ourselves, like got them in another situation, we have a history on them. Basically, it's like a record, right? Yeah. And so we can kind of know, okay, why does he keep showing up at this place when these events happen or whatever else. And so I guess, to answer your question, that is, sometimes I think you would, but we never directly found them. The ones that we got hit, a lot of them were command wires when we'd go out on missions. Other than that, it was more any of the little like people who we'd take contact with. A lot of them were just really, really far away, so it was never like a face-to-face thing necessarily. It was mostly just the coward's way of fighting war. They'd have IEDs, and it just hated it, because felt like that pucker factor was 10 of 10. You're just always waiting for something to happen, and we had some good guys, and we were able to find quite a few, but at some point they're going to find you. But
did you ever have to help evacuate wounded or have to deal with casualties from these IEDs?
Yeah, we had a couple, and actually, so we had, what was it? It was Patrol Base 3. We were with the Brits, and he actually, I think, lost his legs. We weren't like directly involved. That was we were on Patrol Base 3. They were running their missions constantly, and we were running the IEDs there. So we were all within like a 2 mile thing, like right there. We could look over the barriers and like see where everybody was operating. And I know they had at that point thrown a grenade over the wall, and it took him out. He ended up being okay. I mean, he has like prosthetics and stuff, is what they told us, or like they were gonna be able to save his legs, or not save his legs, but he was alive. Yeah. So like, there was that. We saw a lot of times when we were on the patrol bases, when you'd see those birds coming in and taking them out and stuff, like wounded, but nothing really from like our direct.
So you guys were pretty
route
protected.
Clearance missions. Yeah, we were like pretty protected. Obviously, we'd get casualties out of our own vehicles when we got hit, but it was more, they'd have to go through, I think it might be called a MACE test or something. They ask you a list of like these stupid words, bubble, saddle, whatever, you know, and then they ask you some questions, they go through this, and then they ask you the list again, and it's just this test of things that they can like, oh, repeat the words back to me, and they kind of gauge on like what your baseline was and like where you are now, and like, oh yeah, you're screwed, or or yeah, like you're okay, you know, and that's kind of where they can figure like, yeah, you should probably head back, or you know, and you get medevaced, maybe not medevaced, casevaced back, so like another platoon's coming through, you know, they'll take you back with them or something, or anyways. So that's what we did. We also had like procedure for getting people out of the vehicle, because once you get hit, so for example, when we got hit, we had a protocol. They had to come and get us out. We did not get out of the vehicle. They had to come get us out and evac us essentially. And that's when like they had the Valens, because obviously then you have to dismount, and they have these basically mine detectors, and you know, they're coming on up to us. That was pretty crazy. I remember this guy Poley and another sergeant first class. He was they were coming up to our vehicle, you know, there they were with the mine detector, and sure enough, they opened the door for us, like the back, to get us out, and Master Ryan looks over and he was like, what are you guys doing? Like, there's a wire right there, you know, and he's like, don't worry about that, like step over it, and we did, we stepped over it and everything, and we looked, and it is the craziest thing that ended up being a secondary IED, which almost always happen. In our experience, it almost always happened. They very frequently put secondary IEDs in place, so that when you do and then somebody comes up, they get hit as well. You know, they just plan it out. They choreograph it really, really well. And sure enough, that turned out to be a secondary IED. I was like, wow, I'm really glad we didn't step on that. And we actually have pictures of because I was gone, but the guys who were doing the post EOD and like doing the secondaries and stuff, they found that secondary. But before they found it, there's a picture that somebody took of us as we're getting like pulled out, and you can see the charge. The first charge went off, blew us, and it knocked that second one around enough that it kind of like unburied itself, and it was sitting right there. Is the eeriest thing looking at this photo, and you're like, that's that secondary IED. It was like right here by the tire. You could see those wires, and like we literally stepped out over it again. I'm like, wow, that would have been so bad. But so it's
what percentage cool. What percentage of your company do you think suffered a TBI while you were over there?
I don't know. I think a lot of them needed to be, probably, who didn't. So I don't know whether it's a formal diagnosis or not. I'd say a significant number of, I mean, I would just be guessing with the percentage. I want to say, personally, I'd guess probably half or of the ones who like got hit or more. I could be totally wrong, but even if I just look at like with my own platoon, I look at some of them and they have some memory issues and stuff, whether they'll claim it or not, and it's like so whether it was a formal diagnosis or not, and they're kind of looking back, a lot of it too is people didn't want to take the time to get take care of themselves, and it's hard because it's the last thing you want to do when you're demobilizing is to potentially sit around there for a few extra months and have your stuff taken care of. You just want to get back. I'm sure, frankly, I probably would have been in the same situation. But for me, I was kind of coerced. Maybe not coerced. I was like, that was mandatory. You know, they were like, no, you are going to Germany now. And then, no, you are going here. And so that was just the path that was there. And so, but a lot of times I think, you know, you need to stick around. You need to get cleared up, because that is a very real thing. TBIs are just so prevalent, and it's easy because whether or not it breaches the hull or not, like you're hitting your head, you're nearby explosives or anything else, and especially if it's something where you're dismounted, like a blast of an RPG or anything, you know. So I suspect it's a lot more than the guys I know who have formally been diagnosed. But
so you, I think if I remember correctly, the mission where you got hit was the first real mission. That was in July
5th. Yeah, that was my hit day.
And then you didn't go to see a doctor until January?
Yeah, it's January, February. I think I finally went out there.
So yeah. What was happening to you where people were like, it's obvious you need to go to the doctor?
It wasn't actually so much like that. It was more just like things I started noticing, you know, like trying to do pull-ups or even like lifting dumbbells, like whenever we'd be at the gym or something. noticing that like I've had like a lot of deterioration in my hand, and I wasn't able to hold things. I had a lot of pain like in my arms, like, and I still have constant like pain in my arms, like my forearms specifically, and like a lot of times like my tricep will just sit and twitch like all the time, you know, just a weird muscular type things. And that's when it was something like, okay, something's definitely going on here. And that's when you know, they put it back to like when they look back at the records, because our doc was really, really good with documenting everything and making sure things were, you know, well documented and everything else. And so it painted a clear picture between the pictures and videos and documentation, everything of what had happened, and then kind of mapping that back eventually once I finally did get some real help for those injuries. And that's when they kind of piece it together. And yeah.
Do you recall when you first talked to the doctor about what you were experiencing in your right arm?
I don't remember how that happened. I remember I was at our facility. We were almost done. So like, I think we were a couple months from being done. And so there was like, yeah, you know, it wasn't summer. We weren't getting hit nearly as hard as we were in the beginning. And so I was like, hey, can I take some time to just like go see a real doc about this? And that's when they sent me off to Kandahar Airfield. They're like, yeah, once we can get a bird, we'll get you over there. And that's when I went on a Black Hawk they sent me over there with the medevac crew to that. I don't remember. I remember it was a captain something, and he was a funny guy, but he was just like, what are you doing? Like, what are you guys doing over in Ramrod? Like, you need to be sending people over here when this kind of thing happens, you know? And yeah, he pieced it together almost instantly because he had just seen it so many times before. He was like, no, this is like a very common thing. He's like, this keeps happening. He's like, it'd be great. In hindsight, though, it is good. There's, you know, nothing that could have been done, whether it was the day of or later. So in that regard, like in hindsight, I'm still glad I was able to, you know, stick around and didn't go back. I would have cut it like really short. So, you know, especially if they're not going to be able to do anything long-term anyways, you know, for that, maybe the TBI, possibly, I don't know if there's maybe some early cognitive things that they could have done on that, but yeah, I'm not really sure.
So if I'm hearing this right, it sounds like you really didn't say anything to anybody until January or February.
Yeah, pretty much.
I heard that too, Tim. And I was like, oh my.
Yeah, some of my battle buddies knew I was started to have the problems. 'Cause it takes months before things like kind of start to deteriorate, you know. And then also you're always angry. You're always like all those signs of TBI, like a lot of those things. Like, well, everyone experiences that daily. So you don't know, like, oh, is he like short-tempered? Oh, like, is there a loss of sleep? Oh, is there a yes to everything? Like all of it, yes, you know, but it's, how do you know if you're not in a normal environment when that is normal for that environment? So I think that's also why too, we probably all were, and until we were back and living amongst ourselves in like a normal civilian atmosphere, I don't think we would know, like, hey man, yeah, you're still always really pissy, what's wrong with you, or something, you know, like
I'm hot, I'm sweaty, it's 120 degrees
yeah,
out.
it's like, man, we're at King Supers, it's like 10 o'clock, nobody's here, why are you sweating, you know, which happened to me for a long time. And it's like, this is, you know,
did it really? So could you talk a little more about that?
I don't know, for whatever reason I just struggled with like just anxiety, like really, really, really anxious ever since I got back, and just don't love crowds. I never had, like, I've heard some people are, you know, sensitive to sound, or that's never really been a problem with me. Mine is just always, I just have not been a huge fan of crowds. I've never also been like a super social person either, but it's definitely one of those, like, I'll just be very uncomfortable if I think I'm being like watched or in an environment where I just didn't like that, because back then it was very, very, like, you didn't want that. You needed to make sure you were with people who were watching out for you. And why were people watching you then? And, you know, because usually maybe something bad was going to happen, or it was like somebody was setting you guys up or whatever. And so I don't know, for whatever reason though, my subconscious just does not like being in that. And I can't even explain it. It's the weirdest thing. Like, you get physically, I'll just like start sweating, And sometimes I have no idea, like I can't even justify like why would I be that way. But ever since I deployed, I can't get over that, you know. And it's been a lot better over the years, and or like the past few years. But even still, I've been back for like 10 years at this point, and I still have that, you know. But again, it's a difference, like, because I was probably already a fairly introverted person, but definitely different. Like I choose not to like go anywhere, you know. Leah goes out and gets me all the food, and you know, she'll like grab our stuff from like takeout, and I don't want to go. I'm like, yo, can you grab takeout? I don't want to go here, or I don't want to go there. I just don't go places now. And now it's probably become more of a habit than anything else. I'm sure I could break through, but yeah, it was just weird, you know, to see some of the, and I'm not the only one. There's a ton of the guys that I know, and some of them had denied it. And then like I look back, I'm like, dude, no, your back is screwed up, or no, you like have this problem, you know. And they're like, yeah, I do. And I'm like, yeah, I know you do. I've been telling you this for like 5 years, you know. And it's weird. I've always wanted to learn kind of more about like why that happens. I'm sure the psychologists and they all know why that happens, but I'm like, I mean, I've been back forever. There's no threat here. I didn't see anything compared to what some of the people have been either in this conflict or, you know, others like Vietnam or World War II. It's like, how is this, you know, that, you know, it's
so
weird.
Every vet I've interviewed has said what you just said. I didn't see anything relative to this person or that person. I'm going to push back on that. You were a combat engineer in an area that was lousy with IEDs, and it was pretty ho-hum for you to get blown up every day. I don't think that is a, I don't think that that's just a little touch of combat. I mean, I think that, again, it's a matter of perspective. There's certain things that you as a veteran talk very openly and casually about that the people on this side of the camera would be like, what? Right? I mean, there's some things that are really horrifying. The fact that you had experienced, you and your unit, all these explosions so frequently, it would surprise me. I would think that the percentage of people in your unit who are probably having issues with anxiety or memory loss or whatnot, I would think that number would be very, very high. It wouldn't surprise me at all. Do you? I mean, I don't want to get too personal. If you don't want to. If you want to talk about this, I will respect that. But I mean, do you find that talking to some of your battle buddies makes it better? Are you seeking any sort of therapy for this? I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
Definitely. I think, at least personally for me, it's just always been helpful to keep my battle buddies close by. Not necessarily physically, because again, we were cross level. A lot of them aren't even in Colorado anymore. But you know, I keep in almost daily contact with, you know, at least one or two of them, and I think that helps more than anything. And then I've also have some maybe who weren't with me, but I also have like another battle buddy that, you know, he did, you know, I think 16 years in group, and he retired after 20 as a Green Beret. And, you know, just having those people in my life, and, you know, or my battle buddy Gilbert too, you know, he's just down the street and I text him frequently, and just talking through those things, knowing that they're still around, checking in, making sure they're doing good. And then just, having that person to kind of be there, I guess, if you need. Some of the experiences, whether they were bad or not, a lot of just talking with those people, I think, has just been therapeutic for myself, you know. And then obviously there's tons of just great organizations that do so many. There's some that have been trying to do it through like archery and outings and spouse outings and hunting trips and reconnecting with nature, like any possible thing that might work. Because I personally don't think it's like a one size fits all, and I think a lot of these organizations that pop up all over have witnessed that too. And because they just, I've been approached by so many people just willing to help, who are like, hey, do you want to come do this? Hey, can you guys do that? Or even if it's just I think they're called like the vet centers or something, and they do like free therapy. You have your DD-214 or you have a military ID or something, you can walk in, you can get counseling for free, you know, at these vet centers with licensed therapists, and often other people who have been in combat or similar situation. Yeah, like combat, which is very, very helpful to me personally, because that helped them be more relatable. You know, I don't think that's necessarily a requirement for everybody, but for me it was nice to have somebody who could actually relate to that on a personal level and not just a kind of theoretical or like educational level. So I think it helps personally.
I think it's wonderful those resources exist now.
Yeah.
I wish they always did.
I think everybody just kind of finds their thing. For me, it's also, just my religious background and our strong family ties, and that's what I really rely on.
Well, let's unpack that a little bit. What was your homecoming like?
I grew up. We went to church every Sunday. I'm a Latter-day Saint, and so grew up. We went to church on Sundays. Father was never really, super interested, but he was always very supportive of anything church that we wanted to do. Always engaged in scouts, and at like every step of the way, he would support it. Mom was definitely the one that made sure that we were there on the Sundays. She's, really relied on like her testimony and her faith, and that really helped build me up when I was growing up, and I was able to have that now for myself. And so it was just a big part of my childhood and my bringing, and really developing those core principles inside myself that I have created my own personal values off of. That helped guide my daily decision making process, and obviously fall short in quite a few areas, and especially those who, like my wife and children who are stuck with me day in and day out, can attest to. But I think that's really been a significant help, and frankly, that's what has helped me probably the most. And everything, I know a lot of my friends have found other ways to cope with it, and that's certainly been most effective for me.
Well, one of the other things that that you've been able to do since you got out of the military was become an entrepreneur, a business person. Did you always have an entrepreneurial spirit? And could you talk a little bit about your business also as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So that is completely true. I've always been like an entrepreneur at heart. I've had a very strong passion for, business ownership and starting, things. Actually, I've shared the story where I used to paint like rocks and sell them on the corner of my old house down on, here in Arvada, and, the typical lemonade stand. But then eventually I took that, and even when I was 10, 11, I think by the time I was about 11, I was a little old enough to actually maybe market myself as like doing landscaping, and people would bite. And looking back at that, I'm so grateful they had the faith in me, and I'm sure that was so scary, but I did that, and then I grew that, and eventually, like in early high school years, like 15, 16, then once I could drive, I was doing, 17, 18 properties for like small apartment complexes for property owners. And so I've get very, very entrepreneurial along the way. But fast forward to outside the military, after I came back and I went to CSU and got a grad degree, and I just once all that started kind of slowing down, I was like, okay, I really do miss this. And this is 2017 where I really started to miss that camaraderie. I've been out for several years since then, and I'm like, I do really miss that all the time. I always think maybe I could like go back in, or maybe I could do this, or I'd see another cool story and I'm like, yeah, that was so cool. I need to get back into that. I miss all those guys. I'd do anything. What if we could have a reunion and like go back and do route clearance for like 30 days or something, And I was like, yeah, that's not true. And then, guys were like, no, you're out now. Why would you do that? And remember how miserable that was? I'm like, yeah, I guess it was. It's a love-hate thing. But anyways, so part of me wanted to get back into that community. And so I established what's now the brand Frag Out Flavor. And essentially it's we have our own proprietary spice blends and barbecue rubs. And it's because that community is really a great community in general. Like the barbecue community is awesome. Like they're super friendly. The events are fantastic. Everybody's supportive for the most part of one another. It's just fun. And so it's already a great place to be. A lot of us have a good desire and passion for good food and barbecue, and especially like a lot of vets or, guys in general. And being Comet Arms, I was most familiar with, being a male-only company. So that's where a lot of my camaraderie was with fellow male and who generally enjoy barbecuing and stuff, right? Clearly, there's plenty of women who do too. My wife can crush me when it comes to a lot of that. But anyways, so had some, was really passionate. And I think I spoke to earlier, it's, coming up with these spice blends were something that I was wanting for myself, these are flavor profiles I was actually interested in. I couldn't really find them. These are the ones I want for myself. And unburied, like a really deep hidden talent of, coming up with like really quality craft spice blends. And I loved them, and I was like, these are really great. And that's when I realized, like, wait a minute, actually, I bet you I could share this with a lot of people. A lot of friends and family would really appreciate this. And then took it one step farther and thought, I could get myself into this community, brand it in a way that's really fun, A, for me, because I love that kind of stuff, but B, to like incorporate all of the other veterans and, find a way back to them. We could help out with like, donating eventually when possible to like veteran organizations, or we could see if there's any way we could help there, or being connected to, when we go to events, seeing other combat vets that come up to us and it's just some inside military humor. And, I'm sure we've offended a couple people along the way who just don't understand or get it. And we certainly have, but the point is, it's been a great platform now for us as we've grown and we've expanded our reach, that we have so many people. Like, it's such a good, strong community, and we're constantly answering emails and connecting with people at events who are like, we're just all genuinely grateful for one another, and that we're live and in the flesh and able to share and exchange these stories, and be aware of other organizations out there that are helping to improve. We get so many donation requests, for example, on a daily basis, and that are like, we are with this organization, and this is what we do for our veterans. We take them on hunting trips in this area, or here we take the wives of fallen soldiers out, or here's law enforcement who have been killed, and it's like their children have been left behind, and we're taking them to do this hunting trip, or this whatever, and or it could be, we send deploy or care packages. We send like hundreds a week to deploy troops in combat zones or wherever else. So we get so many of these, and as we've been able to grow, which is only because of our customers, which are very supportive of either military, law enforcement, veterans themselves, past military experience, and they've attributed like 100% to our success and to our growth, which has made it possible to have programs like our Flavor for Troops program, which they can literally buy a bottle of a blend, and then we will match it and we'll send it on their behalf, because it's kind of hard, especially now with the theaters of operation having died down. It's harder to find like which units are deployed and where and stuff like that, and so we kind of do that like work for them, or we're networked with other people who send care packages frequently, and we vet and make sure they're going to the right places, or we send them ourselves. But anyways, it's just been great because we've been able to have this company that shares something awesome with a great community, but also get back to what I always wanted, which is that camaraderie, which is frankly the thing I miss the most about the military. And it's helped kind of rekindle that.
Now, my wife and I had a chance to check out some of the flavors that you offer, and they're very cleverly named, and they made my stomach growl, especially the maple and bacon.
Maple bacon,
yes.
yes.
And you got various heat and all that. Could you tell us some of the names that you guys have come up with for these spice blends?
Yeah, so we have 18 proprietary blends. All of them are ones that we've handcrafted ourselves, and now manufacture. And so some of them, most if not all of them, take on that military humor. So we have like a Battle Buddy all-purpose seasoning, because it's there for you all the time. It was kind of the idea behind it, works for everything. And then we've got like Salty Sergeant, which is like a salty steak and wild game, and that was kind of attributed to, we'd always see some of those like old school like E7 type enlisted sergeants who were just a little bit salty, and they just get the work done, and it was like, yeah, we got to have one for those guys. And
did you have like a fitty something?
Yeah, we have a fitty, which is like a slang term for the M2 or the Ma Deuce, the 50 cal crew served weapon system. And so we have one called fitty, and the illustrations obviously in part take place of what they're representing. Husky, we actually have one Husky, which is our taco seasoning, and it's we were like, we have to have one for that, and again, that's pretty inside humor. I don't think hardly anybody knows what that is until they see it.
Bingo. My wife and I were talking.
Does it make sense now?
Now it does. So we were talking
Because you've
about this.
seen it. That's
My
a
wife
husky.
goes, what's a 50? I said, I'm pretty sure it's a 50 cal. She goes, what's this? I told her that. She goes, what's a husky? I said, I have no idea what the husky would be.
Now you know what the husky
You know
is.
what I thought the husky was? I thought the husky was you guys had bomb sniffing dogs.
That would have been clever too.
Seriously.
The Brits had dog sniffing bombs.
Yeah.
Yeah. They
And so-
sniff out the
I'm
mines.
sorry, yeah. So I thought you had bomb sniffing dogs out there, and you were honoring the husky. I didn't realize that you had this space age looking thing designed to blow up to find bombs.
Literally
That's
one.
awesome.
It's probably the most obscure reference. You know, others are fairly intuitive, like Bunker Buster.
Yeah.
You know, that's been fun, and it's we have quite a few. Like I said, we have 18. We have a really good quality lineup. Our goal was also to just embrace everybody too. Like, you know, I personally love. I mean, family gives me everything. That's one of my core motivations in life, is just to really uphold and value my family, and not only mine but everybody else's. I think that's so important, and because that gave me kind of this new. I mean, I was always very family and service oriented, but like understanding how precious that is, you really gain that perspective. Like you were saying, when you go back and you have some of these experiences, and you really are able to put things into perspective and put priorities into place. And anyways, I realized like how important that is, and I think the family unit is so important, and it's often neglected, and for one reason or another. And I think it's just also part of our mission is really to help kind of strengthen that family unity and friendships in general, and that's, you know, really done as well when you think of like all the get-togethers throughout the year, especially in our American culture, that kind of take place around the dinner table or barbecue events and things like that. So that was also kind of something we were trying to really help, is make sure we had something for everybody. So we do have like pretty wide variety of flavors, because we want to make sure that it could be something where like even the pickiest do eaters, which is great because I have some young children. And so I was really able to test out and make sure it's like, whether it's spicy or dull or sweet or savory or whatever, somebody's going to be able to enjoy it.
So that's, go ahead, Tim.
I'd love to ask you a little bit more on especially the flavor naming
Yeah.
and design. But before we jump into that, I want to go back to family.
Yeah.
And you know, you're deployed 8 days after your son, or you're called out 8 days after your son is born, or you bring him home, and you're gone for essentially his first full year of life. How did you manage that? How did you communicate with your wife about what life was like while you were gone?
It was challenging for sure, and it was difficult because communication was not always made possible or readily available. We did get internet, but it was, you know, extremely slow or only seldom available at some times. Other times you'd have to use like the MWR for phone, but then there's the time difference, which that usually was never a problem. She'd always answer, regardless, they were going to answer your call. But it was more just, again, it's, can I get there? Do I even have time to, you know? So, I mean, it was definitely challenging for us personally. I think, again, going back to our faith really kind of helped us. It was one of our core principles that we kind of live behind and helps get us through a lot. And then also just the communication we had in the past. And she was my school sweetheart too. So we lucked out knowing each other since we were 15 anyways. And so, you know, even though we were young, we did have some, you know, it's not like we only knew each other for a year or something like that. So we had that going for us as well. But I think just, you know, communicating when we could. I think Riley was just the biggest blessing that he was with her family. Again, I saw how important family was and how supportive it was. I mean, if she needed something, you know, my parents, her parents were here nearby, which was also helpful geographically, but just in general, she had a good support system. And that's, again, why I just think it's so important to like really give anybody the opportunity they can, if there's any possible chance they can, to like rekindle that or strengthen that in their own lives to do so. But it was challenging because there was a lot of time uncertainty. I think it was probably easy for me and not so much for her. Frankly, I can only imagine what it would have been like when you say bye. I know what it's like. I'm there. When something is bad or horrible, like I know because I'm there and I'm living it right now, what the situation is. And I can tell you right now, any second that's happening, like, okay, things just got a lot better because I see this person over here now, or oh, they're all, but that's delayed. The information may not get back to them for a long time. And frankly, we just didn't share experiences until we got back, or if that, other than my dad, I figured he'd appreciate some of those. But yeah, I think I know my mom in particular would tell me of times she just heard of Leah like crying at night. She would always hold it together, never in front of anybody, and then would just be like bawling at night in her room, and it was just so sad because I know it was hard. That's got to be so challenging, and I'm just so grateful we had Riley, albeit super hard circumstances because he was so preemie, had so many medical things. But with that said too, she was always at the doctor to help him with his therapies and stuff. He was just kept her so busy, and I think that really helped. And I did have a really good platoon leader. We didn't always see eye to eye, and we were butt heads sometimes, but in hindsight, like, I owe it to him. He was the one that was him, and actually especially my really close friend Fisher, originally when I had 2 weeks leave, so you get 2 weeks of leave to come back, and well, they make you leave, so if you don't come back, they'll send you to Qatar, I think. Either way, you're taking two weeks off. So and I came back, and originally they scheduled me for like July. I mean, it was like a couple months after we were like in the groove, or and I was like, man, that's gonna be really hard. My family, it would be nice for them to like have a break, preferably halfway through-ish, but obviously that everybody would want that, and that's just not possible. So they had to start leave rotations a month after, all the way to like a month before we were going to be leaving. And so anyways, I got like stuck on the July, I think it was like a month or a couple months after, and he was willing to like swap with me, and that was just another example of that camaraderie. And then the platoon leader was authorizing. He was like, yeah, I'm happy to do that. He wasn't just he was like, yes, we can make that swap. And of course Fisher, I mean, I just owe it so much, and I don't think he'll ever realize how important that was to me, where he was like, yeah, I'll swap, and he accepted the swap. And anyways, so I did get to be home for his first birthday, which was the coolest thing. I was trying so hard for that, and so I did. And then I came back, and then when I got back later, officially, like end of tour and everything else, he was walking and stuff, so that was super cool. But yeah, it was just wild. He didn't know the communication. Again, that was interesting even for him. Like, he didn't know almost anything, but he always thought I was a computer because we could Skype sometimes, and so he thought I was the computer head. He thought I was his head. So eventually when I came, like, and he'd look behind the computer and stuff, is what Leah told me. He'd like look behind and see, and nobody was there. And so he always thought that's who I was. And then when I came back, I guess he was like shocked. And I know Leah remembers it super vividly because it was a huge shift, because she saw what it was like. For me, I just like was seeing him, and it was super exciting. But I think she said like he was blown away. He's like, what? I'm so confused. What's happening? Where is he? I'm kind of scared. He just didn't know. And so that was kind of a really weird form of communication too. Like, it went from one extreme to the other for him, even at that young age. But so I was super grateful. At least I could experience his first birthday, which I know a lot of people don't get to do. A lot of them had, well, not a lot of them in where I was deployed, but I know you hear that a lot, where they miss first birthdays or firsts, and there's a lot of firsts you miss. But I was glad that I was there for that one.
I hadn't even thought about the impact of that, about being away that long, and having your son develop this connection remotely. And then
it probably wasn't best for him, of all children, who already was like struggling with developmental like problems, being so premature, to like have him go through that, in hindsight. But it was,
he's still looking behind TV sets, isn't he?
Exactly. It's like, I think this explains what's going on with Riley. He loves computers now. But yeah.
So we have just a handful of follow-up questions.
Sure.
Do you need a break, or?
No, I'm fine. Yeah.
Okay. Great. Tim, did you have any questions you want to ask?
Well, yeah. I mean, I want to go back to the spice company. So,
yeah.
What comes first, the spice or the name? Like, does the name sometimes drive this?
Not really. So I had a lot of name. Well, now from now that I'm like less naive and I actually know what I'm doing along the way, trademarks drive it. What's available for trademark? Learned some lessons along the path, some unpleasant and some that were just like, oh, that would have been really fun to do, but I can't. But a lot of times, neither. There's not necessarily a match. I had a bunch of flavor profiles, which is really what it boiled down to that I wanted. And then I decided afterwards, I'm like, hey, we could make a really fun brand around this. And that's when I came up with all the names. And I was like, this would just be so fun. So when I think of like a really, really cool or a fun name or whatever, and I'll like keep it in like a short list. And then there's not necessarily, so they're both. Basically, I usually come up with a blend first and I like come up with a name, but I have a list of names. I have a list of blends. And sometimes they just naturally paired well, like Battle Buddy, All Purpose. Do they actually go? I don't know, but that's a good way to explain it, right? And like it helps me kind of, like, the Battle Buddy's always there for you. And Leah was like, yeah, that's clever. Actually, I think that one might have been her idea. As far as like matching it to here. And then like Shell Shock versus Purple Hearts are maple bacon. Shell Shock's a spicy maple bacon. And it's like, oh, that illustration is like so much better. It's like spicy, let's do that. And Reaper, for example, is like super, super hot. It's like, well, that's going to be fantastic for this one, you know?
My wife also locked in on that one. She goes, I don't think we're buying Reaper.
I'll bring you a sample instead. That way you can like experiment with a little bit, because it is quite hot. So is Fitty though.
So I do have one more follow-up, and
Sure.
I keep bouncing back and forth, but can you talk a little bit about what it was like finishing up your tour and coming back into civilian life?
Yeah, it was weird, and my transition was probably a lot different than, like, I don't know if there's a typical experience, but mostly you go through demobilization, you come back and you're released in the civilian world, and then that's over for me. I was medevac to Germany. From there, I was sent to Fort Carson. I spent like 102 or 104 days in Fort Carson doing tons of spinal taps and all sorts, like, can they do surgery for me? And like, no, they can't. It'd make me worse. Like, just all the thing, tons of MRIs, things like that. So that transition was weird in that I was like here and I could see them on the weekends, thank goodness, because I was in Colorado and they're a couple hours away, so they could come see me. I could come. They had, again, a great platoon. I guess not platoon. Who was he? I guess he was the, he was the main guy in charge, essentially the captain there, and he authorized 4-day passes for me every single weekend. And because he knew it was important for me to get back to my family. I'd already been gone for 3 months of training and however long the tour is, and a couple months here or a few months in Carson, and so he was authorized that. So it was kind of felt like a long and forever gradual transition. And I went through the MEB process because unfortunately at the end they decided you can't be in combat arms anymore. You can't ever go back out and engage in direct combat because your spinal cord, you could not take another blast like that again. And for what you do in combat arms and infantry or combat engineer or anything, like, you have to be able to do those things, and you can't. So you need to pick another MOS or be medically separated. And which was fine. I had done, again, like going back to the very beginning, I just wanted to do the patriotic thing. So I had fulfilled that. It wasn't like heart crushing to me knowing that, like, oh, my career is over almost as shortly after it began. So that transition moved into an MEB process. I was in civilian life, but then that lasted a couple years to get out because there were so many people coming back, hurt and having to go through the process. So it took 2 years, frankly. But the transition back into civilian life was really weird. Immediately the first few weeks, it's, you walk into Walmart or something and like, oh my gosh, where's my weapon? Like, oh shoot, where did I leave it? And then it goes away really quick, but you just like walk in and it's like, oh my goodness. And you're like, oh yeah. And then you keep walking. And there were some like weird habits that would kind of go away. Like things on the road. It's like, personally, I didn't feel like, oh, that's like a bomb or something, but I was like, I don't care. I'm still not driving over it. And so like you'd like drive around it, and I think I still do that, and my wife just kind of shakes her head and chuckles a little bit, but so that's kind of how it was for me. And then I felt personally, I unfortunately experienced just a lot of the like shortness and like real anxious and like what they call like hypervigilant or something, just always kind of on the lookout, which I think attributed to like we were talking earlier, where I was just always nervous. And after a little while, like almost like physically you could see like I'd be sweating and stuff. I'd be very uncomfortable, and I was like, this is just weird, and 1 year goes by and 2 years, and then 10 years, and I'm like, man, it's still here. Like, oh, it's getting a little better. And docs, and again, like the therapy, whether that be formal or with battle buddies or whatever, has kind of helped. So the transition has been, I don't know, I think in one way you transition back and you're not looking for your weapon all the time anymore, but in the other sense, I don't know that even I have like transitioned back. I'm still always thinking of my battle buddies. I'm always thinking of at least one experience a day of something that happened, or using that perspective. So in that regard, I don't know, or maybe it was a transition into something, a new normal, so to speak.
Do you think having that extra time at Fort Carson, where you were having your 4-day weekends with family, but still part of the military, still having that cocoon maybe around you, helped you transition back in? Do you think that was
they did. I've heard of so many stories where people are unhappy with like how they were treated, or that they were left, or that the Army abandoned them, or whatever else. And I am sure there's tons of people who have fallen through the cracks. I know back before now, we're in such a better spot than I know like a lot of Vietnam vets and things had to go through. I can only imagine how horrible all that would have been. But for me, they took care of me every step of the way. That said, I stayed compliant, and you're still under UCMJ. So at the end of the day, if you do something wrong, like they're going to have to do that for you. And so if you get kicked out or something, that's unfortunate, because they're still trying to take care of you, but for me, they were very clear of like what I needed to do, and I followed it, and I did it like anything else. And, it's been really helpful. I've always have my medical needs taken care of. They've always do follow-up MRIs. They're like, hey, look, we don't have anything that can help you now. There's a surgery that is a 40% chance of like maybe improving some like functionality, and it's like a 60% chance like it could paralyze you or worse. And they're like, so we're not doing that. They're like, but eventually, who knows what's possible. And so keep coming back, and eventually in 10, 20, 30 years, who knows, if there is something, we're going to make sure that, you get taken care of. And so for me, it was a positive experience, in that I made sure I had all the resources I needed. I had all of the contacts after I got out as well. So it wasn't just, okay, well, wait, now that I'm out, who do I go to? I can't walk onto this person's office. Like, who do I contact? I had advocates from Wounded Warrior. I've had advocates from AW2. I've had, everybody was always making sure, and I did have to put in the time and make sure I kept these resources and stuff. But so I think it did definitely help me transition in that regard. It was also very challenging, because I just wanted to be done and out, and it was very stressful not knowing, well, how long does this last, and when can I go to school, and I need to move on to my life. What do you mean you don't know how long it takes? Like 2 years, So things like that were challenging. Am I going to have to live here in Fort Carson for 2 years during this MEB, or can I get into a community-based program and go live at home? That was where a lot of stress was, because it was potentially that I would have had to stay in Fort Carson that entire MEB process, which was like 2-ish years on average. So that was what didn't help the transition. But all things set aside, like it worked out, and I did have people that got me to where I needed to be in a community-based program. And so, yeah, I'm very grateful for everybody that helped me along the way. My experience was very positive with both the VA and the Army, and I'm grateful for everything they did.
Yeah. You mentioned you went to CSU. Can you tell us a little bit about your
Yeah, I did CSU for graduate school. So I got a master's in computer science, concentration in software engineering. I did that because after being injured, I was eligible for a program that the VA has called VOC rehabilitation, VOC rehab. And basically they paid, it's in lieu of the post 9/11 GI Bill, which I had also qualified for, but it's had even a couple extra benefits to it. And they essentially covered the cost of my graduate degree. And I just personally value education like a lot. So I wanted to make sure I went and pursued that, since it was of no cost to me, minus my time and a lot of energy. So I paid for it one way or the other, but at least I didn't pay for both sides of it, I guess. And so I did that. And then just again, I wanted a little bit of diversity between, you know, like CTU I felt was a really good fit for me, but it's not like a renowned school by any means. And people might think like, well, I mean, it's accredited and stuff, but maybe somebody's like, I want some like more of a namey school, or vice versa. Or so I kind of wanted to diversify it a little bit, and so I really like CSU. It's somewhere I would have considered for undergrad too. So I went there for grad school, and it was just a really great opportunity. I was so grateful that they paid for that, you know, because otherwise I probably would have gone back, but I don't think it would have been immediate. And it really kept me going, especially after a high pace and high energy in the military, and then coming out, I just went high paced into school, and then coming out of that, I went high paced into like personal projects and then the company at some point. So it's been nice, and then slowly transitioning down, but just keeping that energy and that momentum going, and not having like that instant drop, which I think is attributed to so many of the great things we've been able to accomplish since then.
That's super cool.
Yeah.
All right. One last question, 2 parts, then I'll let these guys get after it.
Anytime, no problem.
So 9/11, you were probably what?
10. I was 10.
And do you remember it?
I do.
And did that play? So if you could talk a little bit about kind of what you remember from 9/11, and whether or not that played any role whatsoever in your pursuit of military service.
Didn't for me. I think post 9/11, clearly there was a huge shift in, that's when like they came up with post 9/11 GI Bill. That's when they came. I feel, again, I wasn't in there pre 9/11. I mean, I was so young anyways, but what I've heard and what's been understood is that there was a lot more impact from those events that started like, hey, we need more resources for veterans. We need more help. Let's not let what happened in the past happen again. And so I think it was made very much more aware. That's when you started, at least I saw like more commercials, and I just thought it kind of sparked interest, whether or not it was 9/11 and the, you know, or I don't entirely know what it was, or whether it was like, hey, I think this is a great opportunity for me to pay for school, and also, you know, do my patriotic, you know, service, and also like there's benefits for, you know, I want to do the patriotic thing, but there's like a lot of good things that I could set up by following it, and I could follow in Dad's footsteps in that regard. I think that'd be kind of fun to have a tie there. And but as far, I mean, because I was 10 when that happened, and I remember, you know, I was homeschooled. I remember seeing it, and we were watching. I actually saw the second plane hit the second tower after the first one was already in flames, and it was early that morning. And I remember, you know, at 10, I was just literally like shaking. Like, it was scary for me, and I was like, wait, what's going on and stuff. And but I don't think, you know, that really necessarily had an influence on my decision to like join. Maybe it did subconsciously, like I don't know, and that's why it was kind of always in my head and stuff. But it was more, I just wanted to serve. But yeah, I do remember that day pretty vividly, you know, when it happened, and watching and really not being able to focus on anything else. And then fast forward, like 7 years or something later. I guess it actually wasn't too much longer, but it did seem like lifetime. I was like 10, and I remember just constantly sitting and like watching like what might have, you know, be happening versus then, you know, like a decade later reflecting back, and I'm like, wow, I'm here fighting that same thing like I watched. It is kind of weird when I looked at it. I didn't think about it even when I first enlisted, and sometimes when I was even over there. I think it was more recently that I've looked back at that, or like maybe towards the tail end of when I was there and kind of the years after, where I'm like, wow, that is pretty wild. Like, I'm here, like when I was watching the news, to think that, wow, that's gonna be how I fulfill some of my, you know, wanting to be patriotic. That's how I'm going to save money. That's how I'm going, like, I'm going right there, like that same thing. But at 10, like, I never would have imagined. It is pretty surreal. I don't even know how to put it into words. It's just, it was weird looking back at that and being like, I was so little there, but that's the exact same thing I'm doing right now. So it is pretty interesting.
It was a long war.
It was, I know, what, 20,
Our longest war ever.
this year, yeah.
It was interesting when we invaded Afghanistan. There was a lot of criticism within the United States saying, you know, if we can't win this war in 6 months, we don't have the stomach to stay that long. And then we stayed there for 20 years. So apparently they were wrong on that count at least. I have a couple follow-up questions. One is, did you have a chance to interact with many of the Afghanis, and what were they like?
Yeah, I mean, clearly there was a language barrier, but you know, we had a cheat sheet of like 20 words, like drop your weapon, stuff like that, you know, and stuff like that. But you know, it was great. I loved the people personally. I thought they were great. I know some of them. I mean, there's some people loved us, some people hated us. I'm sure you could tell there was some units that kids like chuck rocks at the gunners, and there's others who were just like super thrilled when we get there. Me and my platoon sergeant and the other guys in our truck, we eventually found ourselves in the same truck almost all the time, and we got into this habit on our day missions anyways, where we would gather stuff from the DFAC, and it almost to the point where we were like uncomfortable doing it. He's like, come on, we're gonna go get some stuff for the DFAC. He's our platoon sergeant, we're gonna listen, you know. And Sergeant Simpson, there he is, you know, we see him running with this big stuff of like from out back behind the DFAC that he basically just took from the DFAC and ran, and he's like bringing it in, and he's like, we're getting all this stuff for the kids, and I'm just like, oh man. He's like, can you guys go get some? And I'm like, I'm not doing that. You know. And anyways, but he was so good because we just want to go out and interact with the children, and so our truck was nice. I know some people didn't really care, and unfortunately you'd hear some things like, well, now we know why some of them are bitter. It's because you learned of some of the jokes or pranks that, like, you know, people would play, and you're like, really guys, thanks, now we got to deal with that. But for our interactions, it was really, they were really positive. The kids loved us. I've got pictures in my office, probably a good half of them, that it's like interacting with the civilians. Just loved the kids. They were super, you know, cute little kids and hard workers, you know, which I could just, like, I'm still admired to this day how, I mean, I remember we were out in the middle of nowhere, and there's this kid with like these goats and another kid with like all these sticks or something. I don't even know what they were, but they're on his back, and I'm like, how are you holding that? He was in the middle of nowhere, like in the middle of this desert, and obviously I'm sure his house was somewhere, but it wasn't close, you know, and he's out there, you know, doing this work. And I don't know how old he couldn't have been more than 5 or 6, you know. I'm like, how do you do this? He grew up already, you know?
Yes.
And, you know, I remember a couple times where a man and his son were constantly, like, working all day while we were doing patrol for out at a patrol base with the Brits, and we were doing Overwatch at that time. And I'll never forget, you know, at the end of the hard day, they were watching the sunset go down, and I never actually interacted with these, so I waved them a couple times, but like I just kind of more observed them throughout the entire day, and they worked hard all day. And then him and his son were sitting there, and the sun was going down. They were just kind of watching the sunset, and then all of a sudden, and it was just like such a cool bonding moment, you know. But then all of a sudden, like a firefight broke out, and you started hearing like all this gunfire over here, and it's like, man, how miserable. He's like trying to engage in something fun, and like there's freaking fighting going on over here. It's just a nut. So I always tried I just felt so bad for them. So I just always tried to personally interact with the children and the people. And my experience was very positive with them. You know, I know there was plenty of times where we heard, like, we had a medic that got, I think it was the medic, he got stabbed or something because they got too close. And so they're always being very cautious. Like, hey, look, be very careful because you know, somebody was acting like a civilian, or they were getting too close or whatever, and then like stabbed him. And obviously he was, part of the insurgency, I guess. But so my experiences were very positive though. And I always liked engaging with them. And
so when you think back, when you think back to these experiences that you had when you're in Afghanistan, I mean, what stands out after all this time?
Just the camaraderie that I was able to build, and the life, seeing how other people live, puts everything in my own life into perspective. Sometimes for good, sometimes for bad. Sometimes it's I take it too far, and I'll tell my kids like, well, you'd be surprised, like nobody should complain about this because like there's other people who do it, and it is different. Like I've come to recognize over, I mean, it's been a while, I probably way to go, but after like a decade now, that yeah, it is a first world problem, but first world problems are sometimes problems because we're not in the third world, so it is a problem. It's like, oh, I'm sorry, your running water's out. It's like, well, actually literally if the running water stops, like we are screwed because we don't have a lot of other ways, because we don't have those things and buckets and pills like maybe we should have, and hopefully people can prepare. But so in that regard, I've kind of relaxed. I used to be super critical and just hate to, like, when people would complain about anything, I'd just be like, just stop, I'm sorry you have to drive your car today or something, whatever. And I'd just be critical, and I've tried to work, and I've become to realize like that's just not fair. But it has also helped me on a less extreme side to really be grateful for the things that we do have and capitalize on every opportunity. Like when I came back, and it's like, well, I have my family, and I want everybody else to have their family, and I want to get back into this community that I think could help me personally. And if it's going to help me, hopefully it helps other people, being a brand that kind of brings camaraderie amongst each other again. And that was like drive. There was significant drive for me to actually accomplish that goal, because it's not been easy by any stretch of the imagination, and it's taken like a lot of willpower, and it's, so I think the perspective, the drive, and the discipline more than anything else is what I really benefited from most. And then just a appreciation of life and other people's way of life, and then, whether or not I can make small or large contributions to like improving other people's lives, it's particularly like third world country, for example. Just always, there's not a lot I can do right now, obviously, but if there's ever an opportunity to, I guess, make them better, like just to keep an eye out on, like, not miss an opportunity to do something better, it's like, hey, if all of a sudden one day they're like, hey, we could really use somebody as part of this new organization that's going to do this, and it feels like a good fit, like, don't just sign that off, but like really start looking for opportunities that might help better other people's lives, because it was pretty crappy. I'm like, I'm glad I don't have to. And I'm sure it's probably seems worse than it really is, just because, I know how awesome life is here versus, if you don't know what you don't know, right? And so it's like, well, if you don't know what you're missing out on, like, it may not be so bad. I'm sure it's the case, but I think there's plenty of people who realize that they have it pretty bad, and it'd be great to improve that. So I don't know, I guess I'm just kind of always keeping that perspective in mind, and how can we help other people? And but it is harder said, it's easier said than done.
Yeah. Is there, Cameron or Lawson, I got my sons here, do you guys have any questions for Patrick at all?
I mean, I think you covered everything that I was curious about, so
Awesome.
Good.
Cool.
Is there anything that you'd like to add that we haven't had a chance to talk about?
I don't think so. You guys let me vent there for quite a while. I think that was for everything. There's so many other stories, and yet they're almost all the same. You know what I mean? It was just an experience. It was incredible. I hopefully gave you kind of a taste of the general idea of like what it was for me and my role in the 3rd Platoon 806 Route Clearance Company during that time, 2010, 2011, and it's an experience I wouldn't change for anything. But
I still find it remarkable that you went from July to January, February.
yeah.
And the evaluation afterwards it's so bad that you really can't be in that kind of environment anymore, and yet you were for another 6 or 7 months.
Yeah.
Every day experiencing the stuff that they said you cannot
Do.
be
Yeah.
exposed to.
Yeah, it was a good thing that there weren't any other like close calls, because I think that was probably the one. You can only cheat death so many times, and a lot of us did that a lot of times, especially my platoon. A lot of those guys did it quite a few times, and I think what really eye-opened me in that regard too was that how few significant issues are actually not visible. I'm like, was never a big believer in like, oh, I guess I'm more aware of like mental
Mental health issues.
Yeah, mental health issues.
Yeah.
I realize how very real those really are. And not only that, but like you can't see my spinal cord, you know, and like you can't see
The nerves.
I can't see this. I mean, I guess sometimes you can actually see it when I'm like trimmed down a little bit, and you know, you sort of like, wow, I'm like lifting one side, not the other, or something. But you know, but you can't really necessarily see pain all the time, and it's a little different when like you've got maybe like a leg or something that we would have definitely gone to calf that first day, you know. But when some of those things are internal, it's harder to see, or traumatic brain injuries especially too, which I know so many people that either have and or probably should be taken care of for that, you know. And but you can't see that always, you know.
I agree. I've developed a real passion for trying to understand, help evangelize problems associated with PTSD as being associated with interviewing veterans. It went from something that I didn't understand at all to something I understand just enough to know it's a real thing, and that there's treatment available. And so yeah, I've told Tim this. I believe that human beings are so complex that we all have mental health issues. It's just
I
a matter
totally
of what
agree.
it is. All of us do. There's no such thing as a human being who's perfectly mentally balanced. We all have challenges, whether it's anxiety, depression, manic, whatever. And then it's exacerbated by traumatic events in our lives, like what you experienced. And I think if we ignore it and we don't talk about it, if we don't, instead of having this idea of, you know, I'm going to keep to myself, I don't want my kids to know or whatever, that's damaged a lot of people.
I completely agree. And in fact, I can attest to that. I know it has, because there was a long time where I just didn't want to go get help. I didn't have the time, you know. I chose not to for a long time, and I still have issues, but it was finally I went to the doctor, and they started I was like, look, if there is something you could prescribe me, let's try it.
Yep.
And you know, they went through a series of, you know, I made sure I wasn't just with somebody who was like prescribing nothing, and I tried like a lot of different things. And it's like, you know, it was kind of when I looked at my decade mark, I'm like, look, I'm still it was like 8 years at that point. It's been a few years now. It's been significantly better. And I'm like, look, I feel like it's been 8 years and nothing's cleared up. And in fact, like not even a little bit. And it takes a lot of willpower. I always recognize and feel bad about things after being short with my family or whatever, but like it's going to damage things now. Help me out. And that's when they're like, okay, do you want to try some like medications? And, you know, and they were really good, just finding good docs and like coaching through is like, yeah, that one sucks. Or actually that one made me even worse. Or like, this is really good. And now like I found, I'm like, why did I wait 8 years to like do that, or, you know, whatever. And so I think but I was just always in denial. I never had time, you know. I was always for 8 years, like, and I look back and like how foolish that was to not have done it for 8 years. And that's not to say it's like you know, there's never like a magical pill for anything, but there's definitely people who can help. And like you said, mental health is something that everybody goes through. You don't have to go through combat to do it. Everybody has something traumatic, whether it's traumatic to other people or not. It's all in the eyes of the beholder, right? And if it's traumatic to them, it's going to impact them. And I think it's great to kind of further that insight, to like be globally aware of that.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
Many of the listeners are probably vets themselves, I suspect. And if you could say something to them about like your experience with that, about kind of how you might advise somebody coming out about seeking help. Is there anything you'd want to say on that front?
I would definitely just say, do it. Don't just take the time to go do it. Even if you feel like there is no time, it just needs to be a priority. You just go in, get it taken care of. You know, frankly, like I said, I'm not a fan of the counseling, not because I don't think it doesn't work. I think it works tremendously and probably better for some people than others. For me, mine was with battle buddies and, you know, with you know, like church and with my own family, because I have such a great church and family relationship. Not everyone has that, you know, just like other people may not have. So I think the best, if I could wish one thing, is that they would get help. They would go find whatever works for them. Just take the time, invest in it. Try therapy, try finding medication, try something, but just try the things until you find it, and don't give up. You know, for me, for example, it was a combination of just having a strong emotional support system, as well as really focusing on what my priorities were in life, and then medication, which also took like 3 times or something. I don't know. I'm not super medically, but I know it took a while for us to like go on, and I just made it a thing, but I had to actually commit to it. And that's the biggest thing I could say, is just commit to taking care of yourself. You can't help anybody else till you take care of yourself. And, which has always seemed kind of flawed to me. I'm like, no, I have to take care of my kids or this, but it's true. Like if you are gone or you're dead or something, like you're not going to be doing anybody favors, And so I think that's the most important thing. And I really hope that they would do that, because I've seen so many sad stories too of those who I've known I actually served with and came home who have mental health issues that unfortunately got the best of them, and they're not here now. And I wish I could have helped them know, or they could have done the same step, that is, taken those steps that are available to them and received the help that they deserved. So
Yeah.
and it is available.
Yeah, we just need to keep shining the light on it, right?
Yeah.
So
And that's the most important thing. This helps significantly know
Wow.
that they are available.
I couldn't agree more. And it's never too late. There's World War II vets who were in their 80s that went finally to the VA and got some help and counseling. And they're like, my God, why did I wait till I was 80?
Yeah. I'm so glad it was only 8 years or so for me, 8-10 years for me. So.
8 long years is still a long
8
time.
long years, yeah.
There is. Well, I want to thank you again, Patrick, for trusting in us enough to sit down and share your experiences while you're in Afghanistan, and just as importantly about your faith and your time after Afghanistan, and your successful business and your family. So thanks again for participating in this project, and we look forward to sharing this video with you and getting archived, and also getting to know you a little bit today.
Absolutely, your time was an honor. I appreciate it. I really do.
Cool.
I think it's great that you've got